Chapter 1039. The current Enkidu was Enkidu after fusing with Kingu, so Enkidu could be considered Tiamat's son. That was why Wuming wanted to let Enkidu enjoy this motherly love on his behalf. However, why do I have to continue resting on my knees? Wuming tilted his head and body as if he was resting on a pillow. There's no other way, Lord Wuming. It's probably because you're also mother's son. Enkidu, who was also leaning on his knees, was facing Wuming with a smile of schadenfreude on his face. Indeed, Hyunryong's rumors mentioned that Hyunryong was Tiamat's son, and that Yulidim and the other magical beasts called Wuming Ramu. The connection must have been made. However, Wuming was not Tiamat's son. Even if it was fabricated, it should not affect Tiamat. Why would she really treat Wuming as her son? Although this knee pillow is quite comfortable, I still have things to do. After all, Wuming was going to find Gidia to solve everything. What was the point of resting on her knees? Tiamat seemed to have heard Wuming's words. She muttered and stroked Wuming's cheek. Child? My child. Then, Tiamat moved Wuming's head away from her knee pillow. Wuming took the opportunity to sit up and looked deeply at Tiamat. He did not expect Tiamat to be so understanding. It seemed that she was still thinking about her child. How about I raise her as a stepmother? Wuming had this idea. Hearing those words, Tiamat's starry eyes involuntarily lit up. She appeared to be very happy. Lord Wuming, Mother is probably happy that you've acknowledged her as your mother. Enkidu understood Tiamat. She could tell that Tiamat was very happy. As she spoke, Enkidu tried to sit up. However, Tiamat pressed down on Enkidu's head and stroked it. Wuming smiled helplessly. It was not a big deal to have a mother out of nowhere. It was better to have a long-term plan. However, Wuming did not directly reject this idea. Let's not talk about my matters for now. I'll have to trouble you to stay here and enjoy the motherly love for me. Similarly, Wuming also stroked Enkidu's head. Then I'll have Kalas follow you. If you don't bring me along, I'll be worried. Enkidu's face was slightly red, but she was very serious. I'll always be with Master. Kalas on Wuming's head made her presence felt. My backup machine is also close to perfection. I can guard the great source on my own. Then, Wuming turned his head and looked into the void. In the next second, little Wuming No. 1's backup machine suddenly appeared out of thin air. Then, the backup machine steadily walked to Wuming's side and laid down on the platform. Once an external entity attempted to enter or attack the great source, Wuming's backup machine would be able to defend against it. Using an analogy, the great source was the home, and Wuming's backup machine was the AI butler. After Wuming activated the backup machine, his body suddenly transformed into a gigantic great source dragon. Then I'll be leaving. In the next second, the dragon flew to the side and disappeared as if it had fallen into an illusion. Gorly, come back early. Tiamat waved her hand stutteringly at the direction where Wuming disappeared, looking very much like a mother sending her son off. Looking at Tiamat like this, Enkidu was a little jealous. You love your child so much, why did you abandon Kingu? Enkidu and Kingu fused at the Mesopotamia singularity. Tiamat's abandonment of Kingu was naturally engraved in Enkidu's mind. No, that Tiamat stuttered as she explained. Enkidu's eyes lit up when he realized that there might be something behind the scenes. He quietly listened to Tiamat. Tiamat also stuttered as she explained. However, because of her stuttering, it would probably take a while. Between the worlds. In a large world filled with scenes of the universe, huge transparent spheres floated there one after another, like stars in the universe. These huge spheres were worlds. At some point, a huge white figure suddenly appeared. It was Wuming in his dragon form. No matter how many times I come, this scene always amazes me. Wuming's huge dragon eyes flashed with the light of the universe. Worlds existed in this way, and Wuming was very interested in this phenomenon. Let's take a good look around. After all, traveling between worlds was a wonderful thing. Following this, Wuming flew in a certain direction. Wuming had gone to find Gidia last time, so he naturally remembered the route. However, even if he did not remember, Wuming could still find Gidia by relying on the attraction of their origin powers. Not only had Gidia become stronger, but so had Wuming. In other words, as long as he stayed in the Great Origin, Wuming would continue to grow stronger. In addition, Wuming's body had experienced many years in the box world, and the passage of time had become the best catalyst for Wuming to become stronger. However, the Origin Dragon before and after reaching adulthood were two different existences. The difference was like the difference between an ant and a dragon. As an existence who was only one step away from becoming an adult Origin Dragon, Wuming could sense this. In fact, it was best for Wuming to wait until he reached adulthood before finding and killing Gidia. That was the safest way. However, time waited for no one. Who knew if Gidia had comprehended something from the Black Origin Mud, or if he had analyzed the power of the Black Origin Mud? And most importantly, Gidia must have had something to do when he burned the human essences, and Wuming had to stop him. Now, it was too late for Wuming to figure out how to cross that step and reach adulthood. As mentioned before, the adulthood of the Origin Dragon wasn't something that could be achieved with time alone. As for how to do it, Wuming didn't know, so Wuming needed time to figure it out. For example, Wuming was like a prince who had been stranded in the world. He relied on his own efforts to return to his country, but after finding the palace with great difficulty, he wanted to find the royal family to learn how to become stronger, only to find that the royal family was all dead, and there was no way to find anyone to learn how to become stronger. However, if Wuming could stay in the palace for a while longer, he might be able to find a way to become stronger. But this required time, and Wuming didn't have time. I'm already very strong now. Even if Gidia completely grasps the secret of the Black Origin Mud, he can only tie with me at best. This was Wuming's worst-case scenario. Wuming had experienced a lot since the last time he fought Gidia. If Wuming encountered Gidia at the same level as last time, he would definitely be able to crush him. However, Wuming also knew that Gidia had also become stronger. Even so, Wuming was still not afraid. If something really happens, I'll just run back to the origin and hide. Yes, Wuming's idea was very simple. If Gidia's strength exceeded his expectations, Wuming would run back to the origin and hide. In any case, the Origin Dragon in the origin was like a tiger in the forest or a flood dragon in the sea. Wuming was a god in the origin. However, it wasn't very likely that it would come to that. Let's hurry up and settle everything. With that, Wuming sped up and disappeared. Chapter 1040. Between the worlds, in a certain place filled with the scenery of the universe, there was a small independent world that had separated itself from the original world. At a closer look, it seemed to be a group of open-air platforms of various shapes and colors. There was a spotlessly white platform that was larger than the other platforms. At the same time, it was located on top of the other platforms. The other platforms revolved around this platform that was much taller than them, like stars surrounding the moon. On this spotlessly white platform, there was a spotlessly white jade seat in the center. If it wasn't for the dark universe with specks of starlight as the background, but instead the blue sky and white clouds, this place would probably be a beautiful scenery. However, the spotlessly white jade seat contrasted with the cosmic-like background between the platform and the world, making it stand out and rather eye-catching. On the jade seat on the platform, there was a humanoid existence that was much taller than ordinary humans, sitting upright on the jade seat. He seemed to be the master of this independent small world. He was Gidia, the existence that had impersonated King Solomon and commanded the 72 demon god pillars, the demon god King Gidia. At this moment, he seemed to be waiting for someone. Not long after, a spotlessly white figure flew over from the cosmic-like sky. It was Wuming in his dragon form. "You seem to be waiting for me." Wuming's voice came from the mouth of the Origin Dragon. Unlike his original rough voice, Wuming's voice did not change when he was in his dragon form. "Because I knew you would come looking for me." Gidia's voice was as rough as ever. "Then do you know that today is the day you die, Gidia?" Wuming opened his huge dragon mouth, gathering white flames that contained the power of Origin. Then he instantly shot it out. This was a killing move filled with power. Rumble! The sound of something huge moving was heard. Countless vines appeared out of nowhere, forming a net that blocked Wuming's flames of origin. The net could not withstand the burning of the fire of origin. In an instant, the vines that made up the net were broken and burned to ashes. However, in the next second, new vines would appear to fill in the gaps in the net. Only then was Wu Ming's origin flame blocked. However, upon closer inspection, it wasn't vines that formed the net. Instead, it was pillars of flesh that were covered in eyes. These pillars were the 72 demon god pillars. No, they should be called the 71 demon god pillars now. After all, the concept of Floros was sealed in the Holy Grail by Wu Ming and given to Chaldea for safekeeping. However, even if one of the 72 demon god pillars was missing, it didn't matter. The concept of 72 demon god pillars as a whole could still be maintained. Therefore, these pillars would never be destroyed, and the only way was to get rid of Gidia. Even if Wu Ming's origin flame could burn these pillars of flesh, they were indestructible and could be said to be infinite. The net formed by them was not easy to break through, so there was not much point in continuing like this. As a result, Wu Ming stopped spewing fire. You have always been so impatient, Origin Dragon. It was unknown what had happened to Gaia, but she was calmer than before. Her strength had also increased. Just the fact that his command blocked Wu Ming's attack was enough to prove this. If Gidia in the past was a stray hyena in the wilderness, then Gidia was now a lone tiger in the forest. Looks like you really obtained something from the black origin soil. Wu Ming's huge dragon eyes flashed with an expression of, as expected. Actually, it's all thanks to you. Gidia was still sitting on his jade throne, looking rather calm. I originally wanted to detonate all the black origin soil I summoned to blow you to smithereens. But I didn't expect the power to affect me as well. Sure enough, Gidia was the same as Wu Ming at that time, heavily injured by the black origin soil. However, the damage caused by the black origin soil became a catalyst for me, allowing me to successfully obtain the power of the origin. After Gidia finished speaking, a huge amount of magic power rushed out of Gidia's body. This magic power contained a large amount of origin power, which was exactly the same as Wu Ming's. So what? At best, Gidia stood at the same height as Wu Ming. In other words, Wu Ming was the orthodox, while Gidia was the heretic. However, Gidia did not care about Wu Ming's disdain. Instead, he changed the topic. Do you know why I wanted to burn human reason? Wu Ming naturally did not know. Humans are ugly, cruel, bloodthirsty, and full of evil. Gidia began to criticize humans. Although there are excellent and kind humans, it is undeniable that most humans are pests on this planet. They are trash, a danger that must be eliminated. Gidia was a little agitated. He even stood up and spread his hands. I want to destroy humans, destroy human history, destroy the proof and records of human existence, and destroy these existences that make me feel disgusted. If that was the case, it was obvious that Gidia had done it. Human history had been burned. If it was not for the influence of Chaldea's magnetic field, humans would have gone extinct. However, this planet will give birth to humans again no matter what. This was something that could not be violated. This was something that would inevitably happen. At most, the next batch of humans and this batch of humans would have some differences, but they would be the same in essence. They would be ugly, cruel, and bloodthirsty. Therefore, I want to use the entire human history that I have burned as fuel to help me return to the past, reshape the species that ruled this planet, and change everything from the root. This was the truth of the burning of human reason. Wu Ming snorted at this. Are you trying to say that you're great? Wu Ming had encountered quite a few of these self-righteous fellows. Shiro Amakusa, Shurjin, was one of them. They only thought that humans needed to be saved and changed, so they began to act. They did not care about the sacrifices that would be made in the process, or how many people would be sacrificed. It could only be said that these people had good intentions, but their methods were wrong. No one could dictate the fate of others. Not humans, not gods, not Gidia, not Wu Ming. However, Wu Ming also knew that these people could not be changed with mere words. Only fists could stop them. As for how to change their minds, that was not something that Wu Ming could care about. In any case, Wu-ming was not prepared to let them live. Gidia had already grasped the black soil and obtained the power of the origin. Any existence with the black soil would view Wu-ming as a mortal enemy. Wu-ming did not know if Gidia could be saved in this situation. As such, there was only one answer left, and that was to completely kill them. At the same time, Gidia was thinking the same thing. This was because Gidia knew about the existence of the origin. Chapter 1041. Gidia was powerless to change all of this, which was why he wanted to burn human principles and use the energy obtained from burning human principles as a driving force to help Gidia return to the past and reshape humanity from its roots. Unexpectedly, Gidia obtained the black origin soil and also unexpectedly grasped the power of origin. If he could control the origin, it would be much more reliable than going back to the past to change humanity from its roots. In addition, the existence of the black origin soil would have an indelible hostility towards Wu-ming, so Gidia could take advantage of the situation to get rid of Wu-ming and replace him to take control of the origin. And Gidia also had the same idea. Therefore, after Gaia had obtained the power of origin, it did not allow the mantras to recover. Gaia still retained the energy of the mantras after being burned, because it wanted to use it as a weapon to destroy Wu-ming's weapon. Haha, great? That's my duty. I'm not great. Gaia laughed. I am the product of the collective consciousness of the 72 demon god pillars. I am the evil of humanity standing on the opposite side of humanity. I am the number one beast I who holds the principle of compassion. I am Gidia who burns human principles, demon god King Gidia. Behind Gidia's jade throne, the demon god pillars gradually wrapped around it. Countless demon god pillars first withered like dehydration, then intertwined like the roots of an old tree, and finally formed a huge sphere that slowly rose. In the middle of the sphere, a red light appeared. It was filled with a huge amount of magic power, and this magic power was accompanied by a lot of origin power. Seeing this, Wu-ming felt a little uneasy. My duty is to burn human principles and reshape humanity. Everything I do is for this planet, for the world. And you will also become my fuel to help me reach the origin and save all the worlds. Along with Gidia's bold words, the red light in the middle of the tree behind Gidia suddenly expanded, and a purple ray that was magnified several times erupted at Wu-ming. Shoo! The sound of light shuttling between worlds was extremely ear-piercing. This light contained the power of origin, enough to destroy Wu-ming, and completely enveloped Wu-ming. Not long after, the light gradually weakened until it dissipated. The huge tree ball also entered a charging standby state. The ray that penetrated Wu-ming and shot into the distance also exploded, causing the entire world to shake. Many worlds were affected. In fact, a few transparent spheres that happened to be in the path of the light directly disappeared. At Wu-ming's original position, the spherical light film covered Wu-ming's body, preventing Wu-ming from suffering any damage. This was the defense created by Wu-ming's armor of debate, and it needed to be powered by origin energy, so the barrier was covered in origin energy. Only origin power could fight against origin power. This was the law. Therefore, Gidia was only standing at the same height as Wu-ming. However, Gidia's move was enough to surprise Wu-ming. Gaia's technique destroyed several transparent spheres of light, each of which was a world. Even ordinary humans had differences in strength. Even if Wu-ming and Gidia stood at the same height, there were still differences. Judging from the attack just now, Gaia's offensive prowess had surpassed Wu-ming's. This guy can't be underestimated. Although Wu-ming didn't have the intention to underestimate Gidia, he was even more cautious now. However, Wu-ming didn't believe that Gidia's attack didn't have any limitations. That was the energy produced by the humanity that you burned, right? And since it was energy, there would be a time when it would be exhausted. One had to know that humanity only lasted for a few thousand years and wasn't endless. I don't have nearly endless magic power like you. Only by using the ashes of humanity that I'm going to use as fuel can I be confident in killing you. Even the Magus King Solomon didn't have endless magic power, so it was even more impossible for Gidia to have it. That was why he needed to use the energy obtained from burning humanity as fuel to fight against Wuming, who had nearly unlimited magic power. I have to say, Gidia, you are the strongest enemy I've ever faced. Wuming had encountered many powerful enemies, and they also had existences that could kill Wuming. However, they couldn't kill Wuming as easily as Gidia because they didn't have the origin power. Gidia, on the other hand, had the origin power and the origin black mud that countered Wuming. He could easily eliminate Wuming, provided that his attack hit its target. My dream was achieved by stepping on the corpse of your origin dragon. Accept your fate. 1. The huge tree ball behind Gidia was fully charged. The red light appeared once again and began to gather a huge amount of magic power with the origin power. It was obvious that Gidia was going to use the same move again. However, Wuming wouldn't give him another chance. Fear the one with wings. Evil people and powerful people are all afraid of me with wings. My wings will bring you curses. Evil people can't hit me. With the origin power, Wuming's figure suddenly disappeared and instantly appeared in front of Gidia. In the next second, a pure white dragon claw reached out and slashed at Gidia with unstoppable force. Indeed, Gidia had the origin power and could easily kill Wuming. On the other hand, Wuming, who also had the origin power, could easily kill Gidia. It was like both sides had max attack power but only 1 HP. The moment one's killing move hit the other, victory would be decided instantly. However, Gidia's attack range was too large. Once Wuming got close to Gidia, his attack would be restricted. After all, Gidia couldn't possibly fit himself into the purple light cannon's attack range. Gidia didn't want to take him down with himself. Therefore, Wuming chose to get close. Wuming's dragon claw landed on the jade seat and immediately shattered it. Countless demon god pillars danced wildly and surrounded Wuming. As for Gaia, she flew to the side. Afterwards, Gidia gathered energy in his hands. The black mud mixed with tremendous magic power was shot out from Gidia's hands, shooting at the huge Wuming. Light immediately shone from Wuming's body. The huge origin dragon disappeared, replaced by Wuming's human form with the blade of salvation in hand. Wuming easily dodged Gidia's attack. Using the light produced by the dragon transformation as a cover, he continued to use the power of the phoenix to charge at Gidia. Swish! Gidia dodged in advance and slashed with the blade of salvation, only cutting off a corner of the burning branch above Gidia's head. Immediately, the broken branch that separated from Gidia's head was like a leaf that had been injected with sulfuric acid. It decayed and turned black, until it shattered and disappeared. A large number of demon god pillars took advantage of the situation and surrounded Wuming, twisting in a spiral and forming huge pillars. And Wuming was entangled in these twisting huge pillars. However, in the next second, sword light suddenly appeared and the huge pillar was directly cut in the middle. Wuming's figure turned into a streak of light and reappeared in front of Gidia. Afterwards, before Gidia could react, he raised his blade. Pa! Chapter 1042. Wuming's divine blade of salvation slashed down, but it did not cut anything because Gidia caught the white blade with both hands and clamped Wuming's divine blade of salvation with both hands. Gidia maintained his posture of clamping Wuming's divine blade of salvation with both hands and spoke leisurely. Sure enough, you're the expert in close combat. What a joke, Wuming's skills from Skaha were not for playing with monkeys, but for killing enemies. Let's not talk about other things first. Even a sword master who only practiced one sword skill all year round could defeat a king who had led an army and had good martial arts skills. Gidia was Solomon's magic form. How could he beat Wuming in close combat? Wuming smiled at this. If you're not convinced, in an instant, Wuming held the divine blade of salvation with both hands and skillfully slid it out of Gidia's hands. Then accept your death obediently. The divine blade of salvation that slid out of Gidia's hands slashed down at Gidia from below. Shing! The black demon god's flesh pillar that blocked Gidia in time was cut in half. Gidia, on the other hand, retreated backward. In the next second, Gidia's humanoid cannon that he had long prepared was instantly launched. The purple ray once again engulfed Wu Ming's figure, who did not have time to activate the phoenix incarnation. However, immediately after, the spirit of speech that contained the power of origin came out of the purple light pillar. I am the strongest and the one who holds all victory in my hands. Whether it's human or demon, I'm the one who defeats all enemies' hostility. I will defeat any enemy who stands in my way. Puff! Like a fish rushing out of the sea, a burly golden giant rushed out of the purple light pillar. The burly giant seemed to be corroded, and its body was full of holes and incomplete. However, Wu Ming, who was in the middle of the giant's shadow, was unharmed. The purple ray of the humanoid cannon dissipated, and the aftermath of the explosion still erupted somewhere between the worlds. Needless to say, a few worlds must have been destroyed this time. Wu Ming dispelled the giant incarnation and stood opposite Gidia, who was floating in the void not far away. Around them were squirming pillars of various colors with eyes. From Wu Ming's close attack on Gidia to Wu Ming's use of the giant avatar as a shield to escape the beam of the humanoid cannon, it only took a few seconds. The victory and defeat that had almost been decided was actually just a facade. However, in the end, Wu Ming still had the upper hand. After all, Wu Ming had cut off a corner of Gidia's head, while Gidia did not cause any injuries to Wu Ming. Origin Dragon, you are indeed very powerful, but you still haven't reached that height. It seemed that Gidia had not only obtained origin power from the Black Origin Mud, but also some information about the Origin Dragon. Even if I haven't reached that height, it's more than enough to deal with you. Wu Ming stretched his neck and brandished the divine blade of salvation. The previous fight with Gidia was actually a test. Wu Ming did not have many moves, except for close combat martial arts and the divine blade of salvation. Magic and magic were barely enough to resist Gidia's humanoid cannon, but other than that, Wu Ming still had 12 avatars. By seizing the authority of multiple gods and adapting to Wu Ming's own authority, the 12 avatars of the 12 authority, God's Killer, were quite powerful. Each avatar of the authority was not weaker than the authority of the other gods' layers, and it was considered a first-class move in other worlds. Now, not to mention using all 12 avatars at once, using multiple avatars at once was a piece of cake for the current Wu Ming. This could be considered one of Wu Ming's trump cards. Gidia was obviously not as good as Wu Ming in close combat. The reason why he dared to attack Wu Ming even after knowing Wu Ming's identity and strength was entirely because of the Black Origin Mud and the Origin Power that Gidia had obtained from it. The test is over. Let's officially begin. Wu Ming raised the divine blade of salvation, and at the tip of the sword, the light of the sun shone in this cosmic-like world. Wu Ming was ready for a big wave. However, Gidia seemed to have a stroke and laughed for some reason. Ha dash. Wu Ming ignored Gidia's laughter and instantly condensed a sun at the tip of the divine blade of salvation. However, at this moment, the demon god pillar beside Gidia wriggled, and then something was presented in front of Gidia by the demon god pillar as if it was presenting a treasure. It was a building wrapped in a transparent ball of light, and it was still snowing heavily inside, as if it was a Christmas crystal ball. However, Wu Ming recognized this thing. This was Chaldea, a human security organization located on a snowy mountain a few thousand meters above sea level. It was also where Gadotsi, Matthew, Roman, and Olga Marie were currently located. I see. Wu Ming directly dispersed the sun at the tip of the sword. When you transformed your jade throne into a small world and left the world of the type moon, did you bring Chaldea with you? Did Flawlos help you locate it? After all, Chaldea was considered a singularity that was difficult to find after being burned by the Anthropocene. Gidia wouldn't be able to find it so easily, and the Origin Black Mud and Origin Power weren't omnipotent. That's right. It was the moment Flawlos escaped from your seal, he sent me Chaldea's location, but there's something I need to say. Gidia took the Chaldea crystal ball with one hand. Long before you entered the Mesopotamia singularity, I had already done this. In other words, whether it was Gadotsi and Wu Ming smoothly arriving in Mesopotamia or successfully solving the problem of the Mesopotamia singularity, it was all under Gidia's control. So, It seemed that the reason why Chaldea was able to reverse locate Gidea's lair was actually because of Gidea's instructions? At this moment, Wuming couldn't help but frown. Gidea taking this out now not only meant that he had been going easy on Wuming, but in a sense, he was also threatening Wuming. Because Gidea saw Wuming's concern. You really cherish these worlds. That's right, Wuming cherished the worlds between the worlds, or rather, he didn't want them to be hurt. The reason why Wuming fought in close combat and didn't give Gidea a chance to fire the light cannon was entirely because Wuming was afraid that Gidea's light cannon would affect other worlds. Wuming knew many people in many worlds, including many friends and family members. After Wuming saw that Gidea's humanoid cannon had the ability to destroy worlds, Wuming chose to fight in close combat with Gidea. Because Wuming didn't want these worlds to be destroyed, he didn't want his friends and family to be in danger. Moreover, although Wuming wasn't overly compassionate, and in a sense, Wuming was an evil person, even he didn't want to see the worlds with living creatures destroyed by Gidea's humanoid cannon. Whether it was the former or the latter, they were all reasons why Wuming wanted to stop Gidea from firing the humanoid cannon. Wuming was worried that Gidea would see through this, so he tried his best to hide his intention. He made the first move before Gidea fired the second humanoid cannon, which could be considered as an act of striking first to gain the upper hand. However, who would have thought that Wuming's intention would be seen through by Gidea? Chapter 1043. Are you trying to threaten me? Wuming went straight to the point. No matter what, Gaia was still a respectable figure. How could she do something so despicable as to threaten him? However, Gaia was kind enough to explain the situation. Why would I? I'm just telling you that Chaldea is under my protection. You don't have to worry about Chaldea being affected by our battle. Then, Gidea put away Chaldea's crystal ball as if he was really thinking about Wuming. However, Wuming didn't relax at all. Firstly, Chaldea was still in Gidea's hands. What it said just now was another kind of threat. Secondly, other than the worlds that Wuming was unfamiliar with, there were many worlds that Wuming cared about that were still in between. In other words, once Gidea's artificial cannon was activated, there was a chance that it would affect those worlds. And Gidea said this because he wanted to get information from Wuming. In short, Gidea's artificial cannon had to be stopped. Otherwise, he would have to take it all on and not let the aftermath of the artificial cannon affect those worlds. All evildoers, be afraid of my power. I am the strongest, and I hold all victory in my hands. I will deny the sky, deny the earth. Make a pact with me, listen to my call, and obey my command. Thou hast violated the contract and brought evil to the world. Bestow the torrential flood upon me. Let out a dazzling radiance and grant me divine power. Evildoers can't hit me. Wuming chanted the words of the 8 incarnations in one breath. Moreover, he condensed the 8 words into one sentence, forming a short version of each incarnation's spirit. Although it sounded a little out of place, the effect wasn't bad at all. A huge dark purple draconic shadow appeared around Wuming. A huge white and pure black divine blade of salvation appeared in the hands of the huge draconic shadow. Black clouds appeared above the huge draconic shadow and kept spreading to the surroundings. In this cosmic-like place, there was a storm, lightning, and thunder, and the seawater had already surrounded the entire Temple of Time. This is a new world. Gidea was surprised. Dark clouds covered the sky, and the sea surged under Gidea's feet. There was no end to the clouds and no end to the sea. The storm with lightning and thunder fell suddenly, and the sea surged violently, crashing into the Temple of Time. Gidea could sense that his Temple of Time and the demon god pillars had arrived in a new world. Without a doubt, this was a new world created by Wuming's spirit of speech. This way, we won't have to worry about affecting the worlds in between. As soon as Wuming's words reached Gidea's ears, Wuming appeared in front of Gidea with the divine blade of salvation in his hand. The huge sword shadow of the divine blade of salvation slashed down at Gidea. Clang! Gidea blocked the attack. Gidea crossed his hands and clenched them into fists, and the sword shadow of the divine blade of salvation slashed at his fists. Upon closer inspection, it wasn't the fist that blocked Wuming's attack, but the ring on Gidea's finger. Although Gidea was a 3-meter-tall humanoid creature, his body was very different from a human's body. For example, Gidea's hands were enough to crush several people's heads at once. The 10 rings on his thick hands looked like brass knuckles. However, no matter how much they looked like brass knuckles, they were still just rings. Crack. Sure enough, there was a crack in one of the rings. Humph. Gidea suddenly exerted force and pushed Wuming's body away. As for the cracked ring on Gaia's finger, it shattered in an instant. Wuming, who knew Roman's identity, easily guessed what the 10 rings on Gidea's finger were. The broken one is a fake, right? Wuming wasn't in a hurry. Instead, he slowly chatted with Gidea. Gidea, who was suddenly attacked, wasn't angry. He followed Wuming's words and replied, "My king had 10 rings, but he only left 9 rings. One of them was missing, so I made one myself." The king that Gidea mentioned was King Solomon. As for the fake ring that Gaia had created, it was the one that had shattered earlier. But that's not important. We don't need a king anymore. I'm our king. In an instant, the man-made cannon that was already prepared at the back of the jade throne was launched. And the target was Wuming. However, Wuming didn't dodge this time. Because if he did, this temporary world that was hard to form would be destroyed by the cannon. Boom! Whoosh! Whoosh whoosh! Thunder rumbled, lightning flashed, thunder rumbled, waves surged, wind howled, thunder, rain, and waves rushed toward the cannon that was fired at Wuming as if they were alive. The moment they came into contact, the thunder, rain, and waves were dyed with a layer of black destructive power. The two collided in an instant. A huge explosion occurred in this world. White light illuminated this world that only had sea and storm. Wuming had returned to the route without anyone noticing. On the central platform, Wuming landed in his human form. "Lord Wuming, why are you back?" After listening to Tiamat's explanation, Enkidu, who was still enjoying the pillow on his lap, instantly got up and came to Wuming's side. Tiamat didn't stop him. Instead, she sat aside obediently and didn't disturb him. "There's a problem. I had my clone stall Gidea for a while." That's right. The clone that was fighting Gidea was Wuming's full strength. At that time, Wuming had used the simple spiritual language formed by the 8 clones: Dragon Seed, Giant, Storm, Annihilation, Flood, Thunder God, Phoenix, and Dependence. The ability of the Dependence clone was that when a clone was created, the clone would inherit 100% of the original strength. In other words, the clone could still use the 12 powers. Wuming had also given the Divine Blade of Salvation to the clone. The Divine Blade of Salvation, which couldn't be duplicated, could be considered as a cover for the clone. The Thunder God clone, the Storm clone, and the Flood clone, combined with the power of the root, formed a simple and crude world. After that, Wuming used the Phoenix to escape from this world. At the same time, he had the clone use the Phoenix clone to ambush Gidea. Even Gidea wouldn't be able to tell that it was a clone that was fighting it. The reason Wuming didn't fight Gidea was mainly because it wasn't easy. Gaia not only hijacked Chaldea, but its artificial cannons can also destroy the worlds between the worlds at any time and anywhere. Victory or defeat aside, there would be heavy casualties in the end. That was why Wu Ming had his doppelganger fight Gaia for the time being, delaying as much as possible. That was why his doppelganger and Gaia had talked about the ring. Unfortunately, Gaia did not give the clones a chance to chat. After chatting for a while, she once again launched a sneak attack on Silence clones with the human logic cannon, and the battle began again. As for why Wuming wanted to return to the root, it was naturally to solve the current situation that was getting worse. Chapter 1044. Gidea had the humanoid cannon, and with its origin power, it could destroy any world in between with a single shot. Not only that, but it also had Chaldea as a hostage. If Wuming fought with Gidea for real, Wuming would definitely have some reservations. Therefore, Wuming returned to the Origin and prepared to explore the secret of the Origin Dragon's adulthood. Only by reaching that height would Wu-Ming be able to effortlessly deal with Gydia, save Chaldea, and protect the various worlds. At that time, Wu-Ming might also find a way to restore the worlds destroyed by Gydia's humanoid cannon. But how would Wu-Ming find out the secret of adulthood? As mentioned before, it would take time since he had no clue. But now, Wu-Ming had a clue, which was why he escaped and returned to the origin. Gydia was injured by the black origin mud and obtained origin power from it. Wu-Ming looked at Enkidu and suddenly said, "So, I want to give it a try." As soon as he said that, Enkidu was shocked and his expression changed. "Lord Wu-Ming?" Enkidu had been by Wu-Ming's side for a long time, so he basically knew all of Wu-Ming's secrets. There was not much that he did not know. Therefore, Enkidu knew very well how harmful the black origin mud was to Wu-Ming. Most importantly, almost all of the black origin mud that wandered between worlds had been used by Gydia as bombs. There were so many of them that their power was unimaginable. Otherwise, Wu-Ming would not have chosen to leave his body and transfer his consciousness to the backup machine. Since the black origin mud between worlds had been summoned by Gydia and caused an explosion, there was no more black origin mud between worlds. Only some worlds still had black origin mud. After wandering around for a long time, the origin black mud accidentally entered these worlds. Wu-Ming had encountered black origin soil in quite a few worlds. The main body of Erica that Darius used was Pandora's box, which contained the origin black soil. When Wu-Ming was fighting against the last king, Roman, in the Godslayer world, he had accidentally shattered the world barrier. If he had not stopped in time, the origin black soil surrounding the Godslayer world might have entered the Godslayer world. The black origin soil also existed in the Star Cup, and it had even given the Star Cup its own consciousness. The origin black mud had once existed in the root of the origin, and had almost stolen Wu-Ming's home after Wu-Ming's return. Although the origin black mud in the box court world was brought in by Wu-Ming, it had also affected that world, and Azdakaha had changed a lot because of it. In the Mesopotamia singularity, Tiamat had also fused with the origin black mud for some reason. Her authority, the Sea of Life, had also fused with the origin black mud, and Tiamat had also become extremely strange and powerful. However, after all that had been said, one thing was very clear, and that was that the origin black mud had all been eliminated. There was very little black origin mud in Pandora's box, and after being sealed for so many years, it had weakened. After fusing with Wu-Ming, it had luckily been eliminated by the immature Wu-Ming. The origin black mud that had almost entered the Godslayer world must have been eliminated in the explosion caused by Gydia. The origin black mud in the Star Cup had fused with the Star Cup's consciousness, and was finally eliminated by Wu-Ming. The origin black mud in the Big Origin had also been eliminated by Wu-Ming using the power of the Big Origin. In the box court world, the origin black mud had entered Azdakaha's body, and was eliminated by Wu-Ming in the end. Even Azdakaha's soul had perished, and his body had been transformed into an absolute evil spirit base by Wu-Ming. As for Tiamat, Wu-Ming had also used the Void Star Taisui seal on Azdakaha's body to bring her to the Big Origin to be purified. In the end, Wu-Ming even had a mother? In any case, all of this meant that the origin black mud that Wu-Ming had encountered or known about had all been eliminated, and not a trace was left. There was no origin black mud between worlds. Only in some worlds, there might be some origin black mud mixed in, but Wu-Ming did not have the time to look for it. Therefore, Enkidu's meaning was very clear. Not to mention the secret of using the origin black mud to trigger adulthood, there was not even a shadow of the origin black mud. But in the next second, Wu-Ming took out a ball of origin black mud. The ball of origin black mud, which had shrunk into a ball, appeared in Wu-Ming's hand as if it was afraid. It was as smooth and round as a black jade ball, and those who did not know would have thought it was a precious jade. "Lord Wu-Ming, where did you get this?" Enkidu looked at Wu-Ming in confusion and surprise. Kalis answered Enkidu. When Master was fighting with Gaia, he took the opportunity to take some. That's right. When Wu-Ming destroyed Gydia's jade throne, Gydia used the origin black mud to attack Wu-Ming when he dodged, and Wu-Ming grabbed a handful at that time. In fact, When Wu Ming first heard that Gidia obtained his power from the Origin Black Mud, he had planned to get some Origin Black Mud from Gidia for research. After all, who knew if Wu Ming would destroy Gidia in the end? To be safe, Wu Ming collected some Origin Black Mud in advance and planned to test it out after killing Gidia. However, who would have thought that Gidia would add the threat of holding Chaldea hostage to the threat of the Anthropocene cannon? With no other choice, Wu Ming, who changed his tactics at the last minute, chose to escape and let his doppelganger deal with Gidia, while Wu Ming brought the Origin Black Mud back to the Origin to try and see if he could obtain the secret of coming of age. This idea was a little uncertain, but Wu Ming was uncertain. As an old gambler, Wu Ming was also gambling. Wu Ming was not sure if the Origin Black Mud could help Wu Ming obtain the secret of coming of age, so Wu Ming gambled on the good side and came back to try. Wu Ming had also been severely injured by the Origin Black Mud together with Gidia, but Wu Ming managed to separate his mind from his body in time and went to the backup machine, so he did not know if the Origin Black Mud had any effect on Wu Ming's growth. However, the reason why Wu Ming's body grew so quickly was probably not entirely because he stayed in the box garden world for a long time. The passage of time could indeed have an effect on the growth of the Origin Dragon, but the number of years needed was astronomical. Therefore, it was very likely that the Origin Black Mud did have a promoting effect on Wu Ming's growth. It was a pity that Wu Ming had shifted his mind back then and did not experience the secrets brought by the Origin Black Mud, nor did he know the changes the Origin Black Mud had on Wu Ming's body. Thinking about it carefully, Wu Ming increasingly felt that the reason he was approaching the level of coming of age so quickly was very likely because he was severely injured by the Origin Black Mud back then. Now, Wu Ming did not know whether to laugh or cry. If Wu Ming's mind had not shifted to the backup machine back then, he might have beaten Gidia up by now. However, Wu Ming didn't regret it. After all, if the events of a certain time in the past were to change, then everything that Wu Ming experienced in the future would probably be completely different. Wu Ming cherished all the people and things that he had encountered so far. So, regret? That was impossible. Although the Origin Black Mud was indeed terrifying to Wu Ming, when he thought about the people and things that he had encountered so far, Wu Ming suddenly felt that the Origin Black Mud was actually not that scary. Looking at the Origin Black Mud floating in his hand, Wu Ming immediately made up his mind. Chapter 1045. Suddenly, Wu Ming pressed the black Origin soil against his heart. Thump, thump. In an instant, Wu Ming's heart let out a clear sound that spread throughout the entire route. Then, Wu Ming showed a pained expression. Lord Wu Ming? Enkidu was so scared that he quickly held Wu Ming. Then I'm fine. Wu Ming's pained expression eased a little, and he no longer seemed to be in so much pain. However, this was only because Wu Ming didn't want Enki to worry. He forced himself to relax his furrowed brows because of the pain. In fact, the pain coming from his heart was too much for Wu Ming to bear. Why is it so painful? Wu Ming wailed in his heart. This was not much less painful than when Wu Ming was blown up by the explosion caused by Gidia detonating the black Origin soil. Back then, Wu Ming had instantly transferred his consciousness out of his body, so he did not suffer much damage. But this time, Wu Ming could be said to be enduring pain that was comparable to that time. This was double the pain of his soul and body. It could not be helped. The black Origin soil had a restraining effect on Wu Ming, and it was much more painful than a sword piercing his body. Streams of black Origin soil flowed from Wu Ming's heart to the platform like water droplets falling on a red-hot iron plate. The black Origin soil that fell on the platform instantly evaporated. This was the manifestation of the black Origin soil being eliminated by the root's defense mechanism. As long as the black Origin soil left Wu Ming's body, it would be eliminated by the root's defense mechanism. At this moment, Wu Ming's hand was still pressed against his heart to prevent more black Origin soil from flowing out and being wasted. Wu Ming had to slowly wait for the black Origin soil to completely enter his body. However, the pain was unbearable. Wu Ming's brows, which he had forced to relax in order to not worry Enkidu, were now tightly knitted again, but the process was rather slow. You and Kala stay away from me. Ming used his free hand to take off Kalis from his head and threw her into Enkidu's hands. Then he shook off Enkidu's support, turned around, and walked a few steps to put some distance between him and Enkidu. After turning around, his brows furrowed brows instantly, and his facial expression began to distort. It was clear how painful it was. Lord Ming, Master? Both Enkidu and Kalis even wanted to catch up to Ming's go. They knew that Ming didn't want them to worry, and also didn't want them to be affected by the accident that might happen later. That was why Ming told Enkidu and Kalis to stay away from him. However, Enkidu and Kalis wouldn't want to stay away from Ming because of something like this. However, in the next second, a hand landed on Enkidu's shoulder. Enkidu, who was holding Kalis's head, was stunned and immediately turned around. It was Tiamat. Tiamat, who was originally sitting in a daze, stood up and walked behind Enkidu. When she saw Enkidu turn around to look at her, Tiamat let go of Enkidu's shoulder, then walked with her slender legs and slowly walked toward Ming, who had his back facing them. Son. Tiamat walked behind Ming and slowly spoke. Although Tiamat still stuttered when she spoke, Tiamat had a beautiful voice. Her voice was extremely beautiful. When Ming heard it, his furrowed brows relaxed a little. The pain only eased a little, and he didn't feel any change. Therefore, Ming was still in pain. However, in the next second, the stumbling Ming clearly felt someone pulling him. In an instant, Ming fell backward and was embraced by a warm embrace. Tiamat hugged Ming, who was sitting on the ground, like a mother hugging her child. Ming, who was leaning back in the embrace, could even clearly feel the elasticity of the two firm balls on his back. But at this moment, Ming didn't feel anything else in his heart. There was only warmth, as comfortable as being in a mother's embrace. Ever since he could remember, Ming only had the love of his grandfather. There was no fatherly or motherly love. Even so, Ming could still feel from Tiamat's embrace that this was indeed a motherly love that Ming had never felt before. Therefore, Ming was quite infatuated with this rare motherly love. As a result, Ming slowly adapted to the pain caused by the black root mud eroding his body from his heart. In other words, Ming's attention shifted from the pain to the motherly love to ease the pain until he completely ignored the pain. However, Ming's purpose was not to eliminate the pain, but to try to find the secret of adulthood when the black root mud caused damage to the body. Therefore, we must be awake. Tiamat seemed to really treat Ming as her own son who needed to be treated wholeheartedly. She even began to help Ming achieve his goal. Tiamat, who was half kneeling behind Ming, hugged Ming tightly. She rested her chin on Ming's head. Her pink starry eyes were filled with longing and love for Ming. She opened her small mouth full of sharp teeth and slowly sang a song. This simple song was exactly the same as Tiamat's cry when she was at the Mesopotamian singularity. However, it was different from the aggressive song from before. This time, the song contained the great love of a mother and was not aggressive at all. Ming, who heard this song, felt as if he had been fed a hangover soup. Ming, who was still indulging in motherly love, became extremely clear-headed at this moment. He also understood that Tiamat was helping him. First, she used her motherly love to remove the pain caused by the erosion of the black root mud. Then she used her song to wake Ming up at this moment. In this way, Ming could concentrate on his research and explore his goal. Ming's eyes were clear as he looked at Tiamat's slender arms that reached out from his shoulders and wrapped around his neck. He smiled. It seems that this mother is set on. Tiamat's behavior made Ming's impression of Tiamat rise to the maximum. Previously, Ming was still considering whether to deny Tiamat as his mother, but now it was confirmed. After that, Ming closed his eyes. He had to hurry up and see if he made the right bet. Ming focused his consciousness on his body and saw the inside of his body. The black substance was spreading little by little from his heart to all parts of his body. The black substance was the black root mud that entered Ming's body. Ming's hand that was originally pressed on his heart had already been put down. Because the black root mud knew that once it left his body, it would be eliminated. Therefore, it entered Wuming's body through his heart and spread at a speed visible to the naked eye, eroding Wuming's body. At this rate, Wuming's entire body would be occupied by the black root mud in a few minutes. Once the black root mud completely occupied Wuming's body, who knew what would happen? Wuming was willing to gamble because he had insurance. He would not put himself in mortal danger in the gamble. In the next second, a large amount of white substance appeared out of thin air in Wuming's body and began to fight against the black substance. This white substance was the origin power. Chapter 1046. Any part of Wuming's body could produce origin power, which was why it could appear out of thin air inside Wuming's body and fight against the black substance that represented the origin black mud. Origin power was Wuming's insurance. Wuming consciously controlled the birth and death of origin power, constantly mixing it with the origin black mud. The white substance and the black substance were like two countries at war, going back and forth, one taking over one side, the other taking over the other. In the end, the origin black mud and origin power each took over half of Wuming's body. It wasn't a case of you taking up the left and me taking up the right, or you taking up the top and me taking up the bottom. Instead, it was a mixture of you and me. At this moment, Wuming's body was filled with black and white substances. Black and white were constantly changing, and finally, the origin black mud and origin power were fighting against each other. However, this wasn't enough. The origin black mud wasn't in its home ground, and it was caught off guard by the origin power. All of its thoughts were focused on resisting the origin power. As a result, the corrosion of the origin black mud on Wuming's body weakened. He hadn't obtained anything from the corrosion earlier, and now that the corrosion had weakened, wouldn't it be even harder to obtain the secret? And so, Wuming came up with an idea. Wuming controlled the origin power and consciously guided the origin black mud through his body again and again. In just a few breaths' time, the origin black mud had completely covered Wuming's body, leaving nothing behind. However, what Wuming imagined didn't happen. Not only that, nothing happened at all. Nothing happened? Wuming was at a loss. Could it be that his gamble was wrong? Refusing to believe it, Wuming once again controlled the origin black mud to flow through his body, but the result was still fruitless. This is troublesome. Wuming felt a bit irritated. Wuming's goal was not to find the secret of adulthood and become stronger, but to kill Gidia, protect the world between worlds, and protect Chaldea. However, this method did not seem to achieve the goal of killing Gidia, protecting the various worlds and Chaldea. That was why Wuming was frustrated. It seemed that Wuming had made a wrong bet this time. In that case, Wuming needed to think of other ways to get through this difficult situation. After all, not only did he want to protect the worlds in between from harm, but he also wanted to take back Chaldea from Gidia, and he also had to kill Gidia. The difficulty of combining the three into one was extraordinarily high. Looks like I have to work on that first. No matter what, they had to destroy the launcher of the anthropoid cannon first. This was the most important thing. Only in this way could the worlds in between be safe and sound. Then, he had to deal a heavy blow to Gidia, take back Chaldea from Gidia, and then completely destroy Gidia. This needed to be done in one go, and the difficulty was not ordinary. After all, Wuming did not know how fast the launcher of the man-made cannons, which were the clusters of trees that looked like withered branches, could recover. He also did not know if Gidia's launcher was the only one that could release the man-made cannons. Wuming also did not know where Gidia hid Chaldea. Even more, Wuming did not know if Gidia had any trump cards. In short, this was not an easy task. However, just as Wuming was thinking, he did not notice that the black origin mud was slowly assimilating with the origin power in Wuming's body. The pain that he had adapted to gradually disappeared. Wuming, who was unaware of all this, left Tiamat's embrace and turned to look at Tiamat. Tiamat did not know why Wuming wanted to leave her embrace, but Tiamat did not need to know. She just looked at Wuming silently, her starry eyes filled with motherly love for Wuming. Seeing Tiamat like this, Wuming did not know what to say for a moment. The words of gratitude that he wanted to express were also stuck in his mouth. Tiamat completely treated Wuming as her son, but Wuming was not used to treating Tiamat as his mother. Tiamat helped him just now, so he should naturally thank Tiamat. However, Wuming felt that once he opened his mouth, Tiamat would become unhappy. After all, parents who truly loved their children did not ask for anything in return. Wuming was worried that Tiamat would think that Wuming was treating her as an outsider and feel sad. Anyway, Wuming was quite conflicted now. Looking at Tiamat's pink starry eyes, Wuming finally decided to thank her. However, before Wuming could finish his sentence, Tiamat seemed to have seen through Wuming's intentions. She happily hugged Wuming in her arms and kept muttering, "Child." Tiamat's expression at the moment looked quite happy, and Wuming was currently buried in Tiamat's bosom, which was filled with motherly love, so he could not speak for a while. After exerting a tremendous amount of effort, Wuming finally left Tiamat's embrace. After persuading Tiamat in every possible way, he made Tiamat obediently sit on the side, and then Wuming walked towards Enkidu. "I made the wrong bet. I have to find another way to deal with Gydia." Wuming told Enkidu and Kalis about what he had just experienced. At the same time, Wuming also told the two of them about his plan to remedy the situation. "Master, is it okay for that thing to stay in your body?" Kalis was referring to the black origin soil in Wuming's body. "I can't get rid of it for a while, but with the protection of the origin energy, the black origin soil can't do anything else." After all, it had already penetrated deep into Wuming's body and could not be instantly removed by the origin energy. However, it was not difficult to completely remove it, but it was not something that could be completely removed in a short period of time. After all, with the origin energy, it would not affect Wuming much for a while, and the pain from the black origin soil was almost gone. Therefore, Wuming decided to deal with the black origin soil in his body after he successfully killed Gydia and took back Chaldea. Next, he would need the help of Enkidu and Kalis to deal with Gydia. He would use all the power he could to severely injure Gydia and take back Chaldea from Gydia. "Use my power as you wish, Master Wuming." After Enkidu finished speaking, he turned into a golden chain and wrapped around Wuming's arm, leaving Kalis floating in the air. "Although I don't have the ability to attack directly, I will stay by your side and assist you, Master." Kalis flew directly onto Wuming's head and settled down. Then, Wuming looked at Tiamat, who was sitting obediently not far away. After Tiamat returned his gaze, Wuming also calmed down. Wuming transformed into a huge origin dragon, rushed into the void, and disappeared. Chapter 1047. The world that was formed by a few clones was destroyed by Gydia. This was something that could not be helped. Putting aside the fact that Gydia's humanoid cannon had the power to destroy an entire world with the support of his origin energy, the world that Wuming's clones created was just a very simple world. Apart from the storm and the ocean, there was nothing else. There was not even land. Even if Silent's doppelganger tried his best to stop Gaia's anthropoid cannon, even if it was just the aftershocks, after a few rounds, this simple world would not collapse because of the aftershocks. On the other hand, Gydia's time temple was still intact apart from the jade throne that Wuming smashed with his claw. After all, the Temple of Time was King Solomon's second noble artifact. Later on, it was obtained by Gaia. Now, it was tempered, modified, and strengthened by the power of origin. It would be difficult to destroy it completely. At the very least, if Gaia's artificial cannons wanted to destroy the Temple of Time, they would have to hit it at least 3 times. This was enough to prove how powerful the Time Temple was. Gydia, who had returned to the world, flew to the ruins of the Jade Throne and sat on a fragment as if the Jade Throne was not destroyed. "Interesting, very interesting. I didn't expect you to be able to create a world." Gydia praised Wuming. No matter how simple a world was, it was still a world. As long as it was completed in the future, it might be possible to form a world that operated on its own. Facing Gydia's praise, Wuming's clones continued to pretend to be his original body. "I've studied the inherent barrier. With my own ability, it's not difficult for me to create such a simple world." Wu Ming's clones were right. Wu Ming had been studying the inherent barrier since the beginning. The inherent barrier itself was a world that could exist on its own but required mana to maintain. Wu Ming's clones were originally God's powers. With this knowledge, it was not difficult for Wu Ming to create a simple world on his own. However, it was Wu Ming's first time using the inherent barrier to create a world. Compared to Gidea, Wu Ming was showing off in front of an expert. After all, Gaia's noble phantasm, or rather, the second noble phantasm that originally belonged to Solomon, the time to wear the crown has come to inspire all things, as Paulina, which was the temple of time, was actually an inherent enchantment. It was a space that gathered and integrated the history of mankind that had been converted into mana. It existed in an imaginary space that was isolated from the usual flow of time. It was originally an inherent barrier, but it later became a singularity. Later on, due to the origin power and Gidea's control of the relic, it became a special small world. If Gidea wanted to, the Time Temple could undoubtedly become a new world. However, Gidea did not want to do that. That was why he kept the Time Temple in its current state, leaving the moon-shaped world and coming to this world. Therefore, in a sense, Wu Ming was showing off in front of an expert. "You're really strong, Gidea." Gidea chose the right battlefield and grasped Wu Ming's weakness, so Wu Ming did not dare to fight with all his strength against Gidea. It could be said that he had all the right time, place, and people. Gidea had the artificial cannon that could easily destroy the world, and the battlefield between Wu Ming and Gidea was still between countless worlds. In addition, Wu Ming was also threatened by Gidea to some extent, so he could not fight with Gidea at all. If one were to simply compare Wu Ming and Gidea, Wu Ming's individual combat ability was very strong, while Gidea's was good at AoE damage. In short, all the factors added together were quite unfavorable to Wu Ming. However, it was good that Gidea's moves were simple and did not have any strange abilities. Wu Ming could still deal with it, but if he wanted to defeat Gidea under such conditions, he still had to plan for the long term. In other words, he had to stall for time. Everything Wu Ming was doing now was to stall for time. Whether it was building the world, chatting with Gidea, or stopping Gidea from releasing the artificial cannon, they were all stalling for time. In order to avoid being too deliberate, Wu Ming also took the initiative to attack, but those were all harmless attacks that basically did not have any effect on Gidea. However, in the end he still did not find any good way and could only rely on force to break through. Wu Ming's clone had received the plan of the main body, and the main body was also rushing here. What Wu Ming's clone needed to do was to cover for the next plan and make the best preparations. First, he needed to destroy Gidea's launcher that launched the artificial cannon, the huge sphere made of dead branches. Glancing at the sphere from the corner of his eye, Wu Ming's clone let go of the blade of salvation and let it float in the dragon-shaped phantasm around him. Then, Wu Ming's doppelganger raised a hand and chanted, "For victory, come to me quickly. Immortal Sun, please give me a shining steed. O spirited horse, with the lifeline of my origin dragon, I bestow upon the eternal glory. Bring forth my radiant wheel of light." Wu Ming's clone suddenly emitted light. In this universe-like world, it was like a sun. This was an enhanced version of the spirit that could double the power of the sun incarnation. A star appeared in front of Gidea. The light made Gidea unable to open his eyes for a while, although Wu Ming's clone did not know whether Gidea had eyes or not. The next second, the star rushed to Gidea. "What?" Gaia stood up from the jade throne fragment in the face of the star that was rushing towards her. She looked surprised. The reason was very simple. Regardless of whether Gidea was threatening him or not, Chaldea was on Gidea's side. If Gidea did not protect Chaldea, Chaldea would definitely be destroyed under the impact of this star. Did the other party not care about Chaldea's safety? Just as Gidea mobilized the demon god pillar and prepared to defend, the huge star suddenly flickered and disappeared. No, it didn't disappear. Gaia could feel that her back was burning hot at the moment. And the star did not disappear, but moved so fast that it teleported. The incarnations on Wu Ming's clone had not been removed. The phoenix incarnation was still there, but the burden on the body was not small. Wu Ming's clone used the sun incarnation. It seemed to be rushing to Gidia, but in fact, it was aiming at the reloaded anthropoid cannon behind Gidia. The star came into contact with the launcher of the anthropoid cannon, and the next second, thunder, hurricane, vortex, and undercurrent full of destruction all exploded in the star. And in this way, the whole star that was originally stable exploded. Chapter 1048. Wu Ming's clone used his various avatars as ammunition to detonate the sun avatar, using it as a bomb to explode behind Gidia. He wanted to destroy the artificial cannon's launcher, which was the cluster of branches. Without a doubt, Wu Ming's clone succeeded. After the violent explosion, the smoke and dust dispersed. Gidia had already been protected by the demon god pillars, preventing him from being affected by the explosion. Although it was an attack aimed at the artificial cannon's launcher, it also contained the power of the source. The aftermath was enough to make Gidia suffer, so he had to be on guard. Because the explosion had ended, only a few demon god pillars remained. The barrier dissipated, and Gidia's figure reappeared. Because it was just too powerful, and with the suppression of the power of the source, the demon god pillars did not have the time to split and grow. Just then, all the demon god pillars stood in front of Gidia, but even so, only a few demon god pillars remained. However, the demon god pillars successfully protected Gidia, not letting Gidia suffer any damage. And as long as there was a demon god pillar, and as long as Gidia existed, the 72 demon god pillars would regenerate. However, the few fragments left behind by the Jade Throne had basically all shattered. As for Wu Ming's clone's target, the artificial cannon's launcher, it had disappeared. In Gidia's senses, the artificial cannon's launcher had been destroyed by Wu Ming in the explosion of the star just now. That's self-destruction, right? The explosion of the star just now was without a doubt self-destruction. Otherwise, how could it be so powerful? If Wu Ming really had such a powerful move, he could have used it right from the start. Why would he waste so much time with Gidia? However, why would he self-destruct? Even Gidia did not expect Wu Ming to choose to self-destruct. After all, no matter who stood in Wu Ming's perspective, no one would do that, right? After all, Gidia's goal was to kill Wu Ming. His self-destruction was what Gidia wanted, but Wu Ming should have aimed at Gidia before self-destructing. Also, was Wu Ming going to die just like that? That was too ridiculous. Even Gidia would not believe it. Then what was going on? Just as Gidia was thinking, a meteor streaked across the cosmos like sky between worlds. The meteor's target was Gidia. When the meteor was still a long distance away from Gaia, Gaia discovered the meteor's tracks. After all, it was too strange for a meteor to appear at this time. Was this Wu Ming's trump card? However, the star that Wu Ming had just created had indeed self-destructed. Gidia could clearly sense Wu Ming's aura disappearing bit by bit. Is this a unique phenomenon between worlds? Gidia decided to observe for now. However, just as Gidia was thinking, the meteor arrived before Gidia in an instant. It was not a meteor. It was Wu Ming in his huge dragon form. Roar? Wu Ming roared furiously and swiped at Gidia with his claws imbued with the power of origin. Because the demon god pillars had not fully recovered, a few demon god pillars could not block the claw imbued with the power of origin. Rip. Immediately, the demon god pillars were severed and Gidia was sent flying. Wu Ming's figure stopped where Gidia was originally. With a swipe of his claws, he shattered the demon god pillars that had been severed into pieces and disappeared. He had to destroy all of the demon god pillars while there were only a few left. The demon god pillars' recovery speed was suppressed by the power of origin. Now, Gidia did not have a single demon god pillar that he could use. And Gidia was finally injured by Wu Ming. Gaia, who had been sent flying, steadied herself and touched her chest. An extremely exaggerated wound stretched from Gidia's shoulder to his waist. A piercing pain surged into Gidia's head. Before Wu Ming's claws reached Gidia, the remaining demon god pillars protected Gidia, allowing Gidia to avoid Wu Ming's direct attack. As a result, This wound was not caused by Wuming's claws, but by the power of origin imbued within Wuming's claws, or in other words, by grazing Gydia. Otherwise, Gaia wouldn't only have one wound on her body. A blue figure appeared from the hole in Gydia's chest. It was the crystal ball that stored Chaldea's base. As Gydia touched the wound, the Chaldea's crystal ball fused into Gydia's body again. Clearly, Gydia had hidden Chaldea even deeper in his body. The sharp-eyed Wuming obviously saw this. So it was there. Now, all the demon god pillars had been destroyed and the artificial cannon's launcher had been destroyed. Chaldea's location had also been found. Now, as long as he took Chaldea back, Gydia would lose everything he relied on. And Wuming had discovered a new move. With a wave of Wuming's dragon claw, a dozen meteors flew towards Gydia. At a closer look, those were not meteors at all. They were clearly Wuming. Or in other words, they were Wuming's clones. And these clones were not as strong as Wuming. They were even much weaker than Wuming. So, even if there were more of them, Gydia was not afraid. At the same time, he also knew why that Wuming had self-destructed so easily. Because that was also a clone. Just like the soundless creatures that were flying towards it. Mere clones. Gydia clasped his hands together and opened them again. Countless origin black mud spurted out from Gydia's palms like lasers. In an instant, a few Wuming's clones were hit. However, there were also clones that survived. These clones took the opportunity to approach Gydia. Immediately, the surroundings emitted a star-like light. Could it be? Gydia realized something. In the next second, several stars surrounded Gydia and exploded. This was Wuming's new move. Using the clones as bombs, he used the sun incarnation with all his strength. With the power of self-destruction, he attacked Gydia. Such a disgusting move was simply Wuming's signature move. It was a pity that Wuming had not discovered this point before. Art was explosions. Sure enough, each of the 12 clones was useful. It was just a matter of whether they knew how to use it or not. After the explosion, Gydia flew out from the smoke that had not yet dissipated. His face was full of anger. Perhaps he was disgusted by Wuming's move. Aren't you afraid of hurting Chaldea? Gydia was right. The explosion of Wuming's clones was not that powerful, but it was not small either. It was almost comparable to the gas explosion in Winterwood City. Even if Chaldea was in Gydia's body, if he really destroyed Chaldea, it would not be a joke. However, Wuming smiled at Gydia. The explosion caused by self-destruction is almost all the power of the source. How could it hurt Chaldea? That's right. Whether it was the sun incarnation or the other clones, or Wuming's sun incarnation, they were all driven by the purest power of the source. From a human's point of view, these explosions were very ordinary. They could not hurt Chaldea's defense at all. But for Gydia, who had the black soil, it would definitely cause double the damage. When Wuming slapped Gydia away with his claw, he clearly saw that Gydia was injured, while Chaldea's crystal ball was fine. Obviously, as long as he attacked with pure source power, he would not hurt Chaldea. Reducing the power of the explosion and increasing the concentration of source power would not affect Chaldea much. This was the effective method Wuming accidentally found to deal with Gydia. Chapter 1049. You deserve to be called my enemy. Gydia was not angry that Wuming had found such a shameless way. Instead, he praised him. So, you should just accept your death, Gydia. Wuming's body was glowing. Its gigantic dragon body instantly disintegrated and turned into countless clones of Wuming. Each of the clones knew how to use the sun and charged towards Gydia. I think you're mistaken about something. In response, Gaia snorted with a smile. Even if my third relic doesn't have a launcher, it can still be activated. Gydia's muscles tensed up and a large amount of energy gathered in the muzzle-like gap on its chest. The time of birth has come. I'll use this to correct nature. Gydia crossed his arms and suddenly opened them. Our Salmidal Salamones. Boom! Countless rays of light appeared from Gydia's chest and gathered into purple energy rays. Each ray of light was comparable to the heat of the star Holy Sword. The energy rays that were gathered by countless rays of light were full of deterrence. The imaginary number 1 relic created by Gaia, Ars Nova, would collect the energy obtained from burning human history and convert it into an attack before launching it out. This attack was the creation of Gaia's third noble artifact. It was used to correct all things, Ars Almadel Salamonis, which was also known as the humanistic canon. The so-called launcher was just a dispensable tool. To Gaia, even if it did not have a launcher as a relic that it had mastered, it could still retract and release it as it pleased. The third relic penetrated countless clones of Wuming and blasted into the distance. Once again, there was a big explosion in the world. Wuming did not expect Gidea's humanoid cannon to be able to fire without a launcher. After all, he did not expect Gidea to be able to turn the energy from burning human history into a relic. He could only say that he did not know enough about it. Thanks to Wuming's carelessness, many more worlds were destroyed by this attack. Ha! Dragon of Origin, you are too naive. Gaia laughed delightedly. It did not expose that the humanoid cannon was Gidea's relic. This was one of the trump cards that Gidea had left behind. Looking at the clones of Wuming disappearing into the flood of relic, Gidea once again gathered energy in its chest and was ready to fire again to kill Wuming. Silent Ming dispelled the dragon body and created a clone. He wanted to take the opportunity to pretend to be a clone and get close to Gaia to rescue Chaldea. Gaia had already guessed it. Although Gaia couldn't tell which one was the main body, she could just destroy all of the clones, and that would be enough. Die, Ars Almadel Salamonis. The time of birth has come, thus correcting all things. However, just as Gidea was about to release the second relic, tens of weapons flew toward Gidea out of thin air. It seemed like they were long-range attacks. Gidea did not think that those things could hurt him, so he did not care about those weapons at all. In fact, the weapons hit Gidea, but they did not have any effect at all. They could not even break through Gidea's defense. There was not even a spark. However, in the next second, a transparent spherical light film with a diameter of more than 10 meters enveloped Gidea. What's this? Gidea recognized the spherical light that enveloped him. It was Wuming's defensive skill. It seemed to be a relic. Wuming had used the skill to block Gidea's attack in the beginning. Gidea had witnessed the defensive power of this thing. If Gidea were to release his own relic, he might not be able to break through the spherical light film. However, if Gidea were to give up on releasing his relic, he would obviously fall into Wuming's trap. Therefore, Gidea maintained his relic until he was about to release it. Since there was no blind spot in the defensive light film, Wuming would definitely make a move when he entered. It would not be too late to release it then. Later on, Gidea began to think. Could it be those weapons just now? Gidea had some guesses. This was a relic with a physical form. Moreover, it was very likely that it had mixed in with the dozens of weapons just now and approached Gidea together. That was why Gidea was enveloped by the light film. In reality, Gidea had guessed correctly. Wuming used the Manchala formation to release a large number of weapons and hid his paradox armor among them. Wuming believed that Gidea would not stop releasing his relic because of a few weapons that were not enough to deter him. As expected, Gidea was hit because of this. Suddenly, the 9 rings on Gidea's fingers flashed. The 9 rings left behind by King Solomon were not just for show. Even if they were almost useless against Wuming, they could provide Gidea with part of his wisdom. Gidea began to think again. There was no need for Wuming to get close to Gidea to take back Chaldea. Wuming could totally attack Gidea first. After all, Wuming knew that he could use pure origin power to hurt Gidea without affecting Chaldea. In the next second, a gap appeared in the spherical light film that enveloped Gidea. An extremely large flood surged into the spherical light film. The flood contained a large amount of pure origin power and could cause great harm to Gidea. However, the flood would cause very little harm to Chaldea. It could be said that it was killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Seeing this, Gidea was even more certain that he had understood Wuming's intention. At that moment, the relic that he had gathered earlier was instantly launched toward the gap. Hundreds of millions of rays of light that were comparable to the star creation holy sword instantly blocked the gap that appeared in the spherical light film. Before the flood that entered through the gap could splash onto Gydia, the gap was blocked. Now, Gydia thought that he had more or less understood Wu Ming's moves. If it was the same move again, Gydia was confident that he would not fall for it. Just as Gydia was thinking that, there was a fluctuation in front of Gydia. Wu Ming appeared out of nowhere and slashed Gydia with the divine blade of salvation. Swoosh, bang! At the same time, the spherical light film that surrounded Gydia shattered, and Gydia was sent flying again. It was exactly the same as the previous scene. However, this time, Wu Ming had an additional item in his hand. The Chaldea crystal ball was in Wu Ming's hand when he slashed Gydia. "It's all thanks to you, Kalas." Wu Ming praised Kalas. "It's my duty and honor, master." Kalas answered respectfully. Wu Ming's goal from the beginning was never to attack Gydia, but to take back Chaldea. Wu Ming had indeed hidden in his clone for Gydia to see, letting Gydia know that Wu Ming's goal was Chaldea. After that, the armor of paradox and the flood, mixed with the source of power, were just a feint to make Gydia think that Wu Ming's goal was Gydia. Taking advantage of Gydia releasing its noble artifact and thinking that it had seen through Wu Ming's scheme, Wu Ming used all his strength to drive the Phoenix incarnation to expand the gap and instantly appeared in front of Gydia, and finally succeeded in snatching Chaldea from Gydia's hands. The reason why Wu Ming praised Kalas was entirely because, whether it was the timing of Gydia's relaxation or the subtle operation of the gap in the light film, it was all done by Kalas. In short, Kalas deserved Wu Ming's praise. Ignoring Gydia, Wu Ming took the lead to check Chaldea. After all, Chaldea had fallen into Gydia's hands. Who knew if Gydia had done anything to Chaldea? However, just as Wu Ming was investigating the inside of the crystal ball, a demon god pillar suddenly emerged from the crystal ball, completely eating Wu Ming. Chapter 1050. The demon god pillar came so suddenly that Wu Ming did not even have time to react before he was completely engulfed by the demon god pillar. At this time, Gydia, who stabilized himself after flying backwards, laughed loudly. "Haha! You didn't expect it, did you? Dragon of Origin! I have already released Floro's seal. I have been waiting for you to take back Chaldea." That's right, as early as when Gydia took back Chaldea, Gydia had already released Floros from the Holy Grail. The wisdom provided by King Solomon's 9 rings to Gydia was not that simple. Gydia's plan was inseparable from that wisdom. After Floros broke free from the seal, it had been lurking in Chaldea, transforming into Leviticus. While chatting with the people in Chaldea and persuading them to surrender, it was silently waiting for the right time. And this time was the moment when Wu Ming took back Chaldea. Therefore, the reason why Wu Ming was able to take back Chaldea was also part of Gydia's plan. In order to not let you see any clues, I spent a lot of effort to let you successfully take back Chaldea. Now, enjoy the feast of the Black Origin mud that I left for you. The Black Origin mud was Wu Ming's natural enemy, but to completely kill him, the first way was to use the Black Origin mud to continuously attack Wu Ming. The second way was to use more Black Origin mud than Wu Ming could bear to swallow Wu Ming in one fell swoop. This was like insecticide and mosquitoes. Spraying insecticide at mosquitoes, because of the airflow and other external factors, mosquitoes would not die instantly. Therefore, it was necessary to continuously spray insecticide at mosquitoes to achieve the goal of killing them. However, if the mosquitoes were directly soaked in the insecticide, even if they were not poisoned to death, they would drown. It was simple and crude. The first move was obviously unreliable against Wu Ming. After all, Wu Ming wasn't weak, so there was no way he could use the Black Origin soil to continuously attack Wu Ming. As such, he had no choice but to use the second move. Therefore, Gydia planned this conspiracy and gave almost all of the Origin Black soil to Floros for safekeeping. He only kept a little for himself to use as a means of attack. Gydia was prepared to use the Black Origin mud to devour Wu Ming and kill him. And now, their scheme had succeeded. What a pity, Origin Dragon. I still can't forget the pain you gave me. I have to thank you properly. There was clearly something wrong with the demon god pillar Flawless's voice. It was meaningless. Flawless's brain must have become abnormal in the seal of endless darkness. One should know that Flawless was sealed by one of the 12 incarnations, the warrior incarnation with the golden sword. That was the golden sword that separated Flawless from the concept of the 72 demon god pillars. The seal on the golden sword was a seal that transcended time and space. Who knew how long Flawless had stayed in the seal for? Although I can't punish you personally, letting you drown in the black origin soil is the biggest punishment for you. Ha! To Wu Ming, the black origin soil could be said to be the poison of all poisons. Letting Wu Ming drown in the black origin soil, Wu Ming would undoubtedly suffer intense pain in both his body and soul before he died. There was indeed no punishment more severe than this. The demon god pillar Flawless kept squirming. A trace of the black origin soil leaked out from Flawless's body. From the very beginning, after swallowing Wu Ming, Flawless began to squirm. That was the black origin soil that existed in Flawless's body rioting. It was like a stone that was thrown into a lake. After Wu Ming was swallowed by the demon god pillar, Wu Ming's consciousness became blurry. The words of Gidia and Flawless were also intermittently transmitted into Wu Ming's mind. It couldn't be helped. This time, Flawless and Gidia really put in a lot of effort. The amount of black origin soil that Flawless preserved could be said to be beyond Wu Ming's imagination. Once Wu Ming was swallowed, he couldn't maintain his consciousness. After all, the amount of black origin soil was just too much. Wu Ming was suffering extreme pain in his soul and body all the time. His blurry consciousness was also caused by this pain. I've underestimated Gaia. Wu Ming's mind was in a disjointed state. Master, you can do what you did last time and transfer your consciousness to the backup machine again. This way, you can avoid the black origin soil's damage to your soul. Collis instantly calculated the answer. What about you guys? Wu Ming forced himself to be alert and talked to Collis and Enkidu. We can help you protect your body. Enkidu answered. Don't even think about it. Wu Ming interrupted Enkidu without hesitation. If that was the case, Wu Ming's consciousness and soul could be preserved. However, this body would be finished. This body that had lost its mental resistance would definitely be completely consumed by the black origin soil. Even if Enkidu and Collis stayed behind to protect Wu Ming's body, they would definitely not be able to block it as easily as last time when Wu Ming's body fell into the box world. In other words, Enkidu and Collis would definitely die with Wu Ming's body. Only Wu Ming would be left alive. I promised you guys that I would never abandon you guys and escape alone. Master, shut up. Master Wu Ming, I refuse. Collis and Enkidu shut their mouths. After all, they knew how stubborn Wu Ming was. When it came to matters like this, once Wu Ming had made up his mind, he would definitely not change it unless there was a chance for a change. But now, a chance for a change was really hard to come by. Talking to Collis and Enkidu had strengthened Wu Ming's consciousness quite a bit. In other words, he could still hold on for now. There was no such thing as a dead end. If there was a dead end, then it was definitely because the person involved had not found a way out. Wu Ming decided to find a way out before his consciousness completely disappeared. Immediately, Wu Ming checked his abilities. Because of the black origin soil's continuous corrosion, I can't use them at all. Whether it was the 12 incarnations, magic, or magic, he could not use them at all. In the instant that Wu Ming gathered his energy to use them, the black origin soil would corrode the energy that Wu Ming gathered. Hence, he could not use them at all. Some of the gadgets and items that Wu Ming kept in his Dragoness dimension could not be used in the current situation. Naturally, the physical relics and weapons could not be used. They were all hidden in the divine blade of salvation that was one with Wu Ming. Meanwhile, Wu Ming's divine blade of salvation was already curled up in Wu Ming's body, not daring to come out at all. Even the armor of paradox that was created by Artoria to create a time paradox seemed to have lost its motivation to live and was waiting for death. As expected, there was too much black origin soil. Because Wu Ming used all of these things, almost all of them had a trace of origin power. In the face of so much black origin soil, There was no doubt that they were restrained. Naturally, it was reasonable for them to be afraid. As of now, Wu Ming really could not find a way to solve the current crisis. However, at this moment, Wu Ming suddenly felt that the black origin soil's corrosion on him seemed to have weakened. That was because Wu Ming's pain suddenly decreased a lot, and it was still weakening. Wu Ming's consciousness also slowly dissipated and became completely awake. The black origin soil was gradually accepting Wu Ming, or rather, Wu Ming was gradually adapting to the black origin soil? Wu Ming discovered that the source of all this phenomenon was a small part of the black origin soil that existed in his body. Chapter 1051. For some reason, the black mud that Wu Ming had left in his body had fused with the source power in Wu Ming's body. Because the fusion was slow and Wu Ming was focused on fighting Gidea, he did not notice this. However, most importantly, the black mud that had fused with the source power did not pose a threat to Wu Ming. On the contrary, the fused energy even helped Wu Ming get through his current predicament. The black mud was still rioting, but it did not harm Wu Ming anymore. Instead, it even replenished Wu Ming's energy. Although it was slow, this was the truth. So it's only starting now. Wu Ming finally understood that this was the result of Wu Ming's previous attempt to use the black origin mud to summon power. At that time, it was probably because there was too little black origin mud. Now Wu Ming was directly soaking in the black origin mud. In addition, the black origin mud in Wu Ming's body, which had fused with the power of origin, had a stimulating effect. With these two factors working together, it successfully caused a phenomenon that Wu Ming had never seen before. This power seems to be the source power? Wu Ming sensed the power after the black mud fused with the source power and found that this power seemed to be the source power. It is indeed the source power, but it's different from my source power. After the fusion, Wu Ming felt that the new power was the source power, and it was almost the same as before. However, if one had to compare it to the source power of the past, then the source power of the past was still underage, while the source power of the current source power could be considered adult. Could this be the secret of adulthood? No, it was definitely not that simple. After all, apart from the source power of the adult version in Wu Ming's body, there were no other changes. Could it be because there wasn't enough of it? After all, this had happened before, so Wu Ming's guess was not wrong. Wu Ming let go of his body and mind. He closed his eyes and allowed the black mud to enter his body. Under the guidance of the new power, it continuously produced new source power. Afterwards, he used this source power to cleanse his body again and again. Wu Ming's goal was very simple. Since the source power was adult, and Wu Ming's body was underage, would using the adult source power to cleanse Wu Ming's underage body be able to allow Wu Ming to transform? That was what Wu Ming guessed. No matter what, he had to give it a try. However, most of the time, the truth was just that simple. After being continuously baptized by origin power, Wu Ming's body had indeed changed slightly. Wu Ming opened his eyes and sensed his body. No matter how he looked at it, nothing had changed, but Wu Ming could feel in his heart that the current him and the him a few minutes ago were on two completely different levels. Is this the power of the great origin? Wu Ming's pupils had turned golden, and the center of his pupils was still red, but it was no longer wine red. Instead, it was a fiery red that was full of vitality. At this moment, Wu Ming felt as if he had just woken up from a dream. Many things seemed to automatically appear in Wu Ming's mind. It was about the origin dragon, the origin black soil, and the great origin. If the type moon world's origin was the origin of everything that gave birth to the type moon world, then the great origin was the origin of all the worlds that gave birth to it. Regardless of whether it was the world that Wu Ming had first stayed in, the type moon world, or the other worlds that Wu Ming had experienced, they were all born from the great origin. They took root and sprouted between the worlds, becoming powerful worlds that gave birth to life and flourished. The origin dragon was actually a guardian deity that protected and complemented the great origin. At the same time, it was also a guardian deity that protected the worlds that were born from the great origin. This was why the two great restraints of the type moon world had so generously allowed Wu Ming to cheat, open a back door, and even form a contract with him. It was because the two great restraints knew about Wu Ming's identity. If Wu Ming was in the two great restraints' shoes, he would have done the same thing. Although it was a cliché, the origin dragon was truly an existence that protected the stable development of each world. It was responsible for resolving the apocalyptic crisis of each world, and it had unparalleled power that could easily resolve a world's crisis. Although the Type Moon world had given birth to parallel worlds and used this method to escape the apocalypse, it wouldn't be a loss to curry favor with Wu Ming, so it had done so. As for worlds without parallel worlds, the origin dragon wouldn't take action when species changed or went extinct, because the world wouldn't be destroyed as a result, and new species would be born. It was only when an irreversible apocalyptic crisis occurred that the origin dragon would either appear with a certain identity to save the world, or it would directly take action. In short, the apocalyptic crisis of the world would always be resolved. To put it simply, the origin dragon was a so-called god to each world. From a certain perspective, it could be considered a god in the truest sense. After all, the origin dragon and the great origin dragon complemented each other. It represented the great origin, and the great origin represented it. However, even if it was the origin of all worlds, even if it was the great origin that transcended all existences, there would still be death. Existence was the embodiment of life, and this existence would definitely experience death. However, the great origin's death wasn't the usual way of death. The great origin's death was to enter a deep slumber, after which it would restart after a certain period of time. If there was a word to describe this, it would be reincarnation. After a reincarnation was complete, the great origin would continue to give birth to new worlds, while the origin dragon would continue to carry out its duties and protect the world. By the way, the origin dragon that complemented the great origin would also die as a result, and it would recover its strength as the great origin restarted. As for Wu Ming, what he experienced was the process of the origin dragon restarting after its death. In any case, even if Wu Ming didn't work hard, he would still recover his strength after a certain period of time. Therefore, the origin dragons weren't a single species. Since ancient times, there had only been one origin dragon living in the great origin, and that was the current Wu Ming. This explained why Wu Ming hadn't seen a single origin dragon when he first came to the great origin. The origin dragon's aura that Wu Ming sensed back then was also left behind by him. After all, this was his home. In that case, the origin dragon that White Yaksha saw might very well be my past self? At that time, Wu Ming might very well have been on his way to resolve an apocalyptic crisis in a certain world, and White Yaksha saw him along the way. Although he knew the truth, Wu Ming was still worried. There was only one origin dragon in existence. What if something happened to the origin dragon while it was still in hibernation? What would they do? Could it be that the root of origin would create another one? In that case, the origin dragon in the past might not have been Wu Ming. Wu Ming was destined to not get an answer at the moment. Also, what was up with the black origin mud, the natural enemy of the origin dragons? Moreover, the black origin mud was currently fusing with the origin power in Wu Ming's body, stimulating Wu Ming's growth and giving Wu Ming new strength. Was this a natural enemy or a boost? Unfortunately, that was all the information that appeared in Wu Ming's mind. It was probably because Wu Ming hadn't fully matured yet. Either that, or he would only know the rest after returning to the great origin. Kalas N. Wu Ming called out, "Master!" "Lord Wu Ming." A golden heaven lock vaguely appeared on Wu Ming's arm, while the crown on Wu Ming's head glowed. The two were responding to Wu Ming. Although they didn't know what had happened, they knew that Wu Ming had survived the danger. That was all they needed to know. It's time to go out and end this. Chapter 1052. In the outside world, Gidia, who had rested for a while, sat down on a random spot in the Time God's palace. Gidia had paid a price for creating a situation where he could kill Wu Ming completely. He had been injured by Wu Ming several times. After all, he had put on a good show. But fortunately, the plan had succeeded. When Gidia thought about how he could get rid of all future troubles, the pain on his body did not hurt as much. Next, we'll reach the root and achieve our great cause. Although Gideon was Wu Ming's enemy, his thoughts were also based on the great cause. That was why Gideon did not think that he had done anything wrong. At this moment, he only felt slightly emotional and perplexed because the great cause was about to be achieved. He was emotional that after thousands of years of hard work, he had finally achieved his goal. He was perplexed about what he should do next after achieving his goal. When anyone's final goal was about to be achieved, if he did not die, he would definitely feel perplexed about the future. Moreover, Gideon was someone who had no friends, relatives, family, or hobbies. He only had the ultimate goal of saving the world through the burning of human principles. I miss the king a little. Gideon used the burning of human principles after all. It was just a magic technique. Although he called himself the demon god king, he did not have many subordinates under him. Although the 72 demon god pillars were Gideon's subordinates in name and treated Gideon as their king, Gideon was an amalgamation of the 72 demon god pillars' consciousnesses. When Gideon spoke to different people, he would show different personalities. This was also because Gideon was an amalgamation of the 72 demon god pillars' consciousnesses. Gideon could be said to be a loner. It could only be said that Gideon's relationship with the 72 demon god pillars was rather strange. Gideon was one of the 72 demon god pillars, but not the 72 demon god pillars. Gideon was an individual, but also a whole like the 72 demon god pillars. As a result, once Gideon died, the 72 demon god pillars as a whole would collapse and cease to exist. But as long as Gideon was still alive, even if the 72 demon god pillars all died at once, with Gideon's current strength, he would be able to summon them back. At the same time, Gideon was an amalgamation of the consciousness of the 72 demon god pillars. This meant that the demon god pillars were actually a kind of technique. The 72 demon god pillars were the same as Gideon's, both of them burning the principles of humanity. As tactics, once they achieved the goal they had set a long time ago, they would definitely fall into emptiness. This was because they were the ones being used, not the ones dominating. Even if they won, it would not change the fact that they were tactics. That was why Gideon said, "I miss the king." As for the king that Gideon mentioned, it was naturally King Solomon. If that's the case, why don't you go and see him yourself? Hearing this, Gideon was shocked. The demon god pillar Floros also shook violently. However, Floros was not shocked. It was because Wu Ming was cutting open its stomach. Pucci, after the sound, a hole suddenly appeared on the huge demon god pillar. It was opened from the inside. The demon god pillar, Floros, was like a deflated balloon or a frosted eggplant. The entire demon god pillar shrank because of this hole, and withered. And from the hole that suddenly appeared on the demon god pillar Floros, a stream of light instantly flew out. It floated in the sky and revealed a figure. It was Wu Ming. "You're actually still alive?" Gideon was in disbelief. This feeling was like, you clearly soaked a mosquito in insecticide, but after a while, the mosquito reappeared in front of you alive and kicking. It even changed from a centimeter in size into a monster. Who wouldn't be shocked? And after being shocked, Gideon became angry. The existence that you thought you could kill didn't die, but was still alive and kicking. Who wouldn't be angry? As for Floros, it was already too busy to care about itself. It didn't have time to be angry or shocked. Floros was like a fish out of water. Its whole body struggled in pain. Then, after struggling a few times, it stopped moving. In the next second, Floros melted and turned into a pool of black matter floating in the air. Wu Ming waved his hand and attracted the black matter. It integrated into his body, and a lot of new origin power was generated. That's right, the black matter after Floros melted was the origin black mud. Wu Ming used it and absorbed it into his body. You actually assimilated with the origin black mud. Did you reverse it? No matter how stupid Gideon was, he could see that this was Wu Ming's trick. At this moment, in Gideon's understanding, Wu Ming was now in a reversed state, which was quite popular among the servants. The so-called altar. Wu Ming's pupils were now golden, and his pupils were fiery red, which was probably the characteristic of his altar. Otherwise, how could he turn Floros into the origin black mud and absorb it? One must know that the origin black mud was like poison to Wu Ming. I just happened to get a new power. For Gidea's guess, Wu Ming did not give a positive answer. Although it was not a secret, Wu Ming also knew that his change was not something worth telling the enemy. However, Wu Ming's ambiguous words, in Gidea's ears, was admitting that Wu Ming had been altered. "Come and try my new power, Gidea." Wu Ming shouted and waved his hand. Countless origin black mud like monstrous waves appeared out of thin air behind Wu Ming, raised high, and rushed toward Gidea. This posture was bound to cover Gidea in an instant. Now, Gidea also realized that he may no longer be Wu Ming's opponent, but even so, Gidea would not give up. "My great cause, my ideals, the meaning of my birth, will never end with being destroyed by you." Gidea seemed to be going all out, his body trembled violently, and then began to burn. This was Gaia, the burning of human principles style, using all the power of the burning of human principles. "My name is Gidea. Humanity burning humanity. Demonic King Gidea." Gidea's muscles were tight, as if all of his energy was about to explode. Then, Gidea hugged his chest and clenched his fists. The muzzle-like thing on Gidea's chest began to gather purple energy that was so red that it was black. Gaia had gathered so much energy that her entire body was cracking. She suddenly spread out her arms, and the purple energy that had gathered in front of her chest, which was so purple that it was turning black and red, suddenly shot out. Third relic, activate. The time of birth has come, use this to correct everything. This is my everything. Pars. Pomf. Salamones. Gidea's relic was released at a scale that had never been seen before on Wu Ming. Gidea's body was cracking at an accelerated speed. Such an enormous amount of energy was not something that Gidea could release in one go. Perhaps, even if Gidea won, it would be overloaded and cause its body to collapse. Gidea was going for broke. This was a battle where there was no victory, and it was a battle where one's life was at stake. This was Gidea's farewell, and at the same time, it was Gidea's unwillingness. All of this ended as the unimaginable giant pillar of black-red aurora collided with the black mud that was like a monstrous wave. There was no explosion as expected. There was only a white light that was produced when the two collided. The white light seemed to have covered the entire world in an instant. Time seemed to have stopped at this moment. However, the most important thing was that everything had ended. Chapter 1053. An unknown amount of time had passed. Inside the root of origin, on the central platform, Wu Ming, who had transformed into his human form, was squatting on the giant dragon head of his backup machine. He placed one hand on the machine as if he was inspecting it. Magic circles appeared around Wu Ming's backup machine. Not long after, the magic circles disappeared. Wu Ming's hand left the backup machine as he stood up. That should do it. Wu Ming patted his dust-free hands. "Master, is that all you need to do with the backup machine?" Cullis's voice came from the side. "There's no problem. Now, this backup machine of mine can replace me to protect the world between worlds." All of this started from, ahem, Wu Ming did not pay attention to the time. In short, it started from when Wu Ming ended his battle with Gidea. Just as Gidea said, Wu Ming had assimilated with the black origin mud, and Wu Ming's new moves were related to the new origin power. Whether it was turning Floros into the black origin mud, or summoning a terrifying amount of black origin mud to defeat Gidea, who almost killed himself, it was all because of the fusion of the black origin mud and the origin power. Wu Ming's new origin power. Although he did not understand the theory behind it, Wu Ming was not someone who was easily confused. Everything would be clear when he returned to the root of origin. However, after Wu Ming defeated Gidea, he did not kill it. Instead, he kept it alive. As for why he saved Gidea, it was not because of Wu Ming's kindness, but because Roman suddenly appeared in front of Wu Ming. Gidea, who had lost all its energy and almost died, was no different from before, or even worse. Roman used his connection with Gidea to successfully escape from Chaldea. Roman's words were simple. "Spare his life, please." As for the reason, Roman did not say. According to Roman, he seemed to have obtained information about Gydia when Floros was persuading him to surrender in Chaldea. After that, after Gydia was defeated by Wuming, he used the power of the 10th ring, which was the ring that Gydia was missing, to walk out of Chaldea and meet with Wuming. Wuming gave Roman a lot of face. He immediately agreed to Roman's request, or rather, he agreed to King Solomon's request. However, Roman's appearance was no longer that of Roman Aikman, but that of King Solomon, whom Wuming had seen at the Singularity in London. After all, Roman had used the power of King Solomon's ring. Naturally, Solomon, which was Roman's original appearance, was revealed. This also meant that Roman had exposed the secret that he was King Solomon in Chaldea. When Wuming asked Solomon about the expressions of the people in Chaldea when he transformed, Solomon's face was subtle. Wuming, who did not expose Solomon's secret, ended the questioning and sent Chaldea back to the original world. The world's people also recovered because of Gydia's loss of power. Chaldea could be said to have succeeded in saving the world. Although it was not direct, it could be regarded as saving the world indirectly. After that, Wuming did not rush to return to the Great Root. Instead, he stayed in Chaldea to help Chaldea deal with the remaining problems. After all, in that world, people's perception was that they just slept for a year. Not to mention ordinary people, the clock tower would definitely ask about it. What could those magicians do to Chaldea, the hero who saved the world? Even if he used his toes to think, Wuming knew what they would do to him. There was no doubt that the servants summoned in Chaldea would be repatriated, and Chaldea would be disintegrated. Chaldea's instruments and components would be preserved, sealed, and even studied by one magic family, organization, and even the clock tower. After all, Chaldea was a dangerous organization that crossed the timeline and had a large number of servants that could be regarded as weapons of war. Even if Chaldea saved the world, the magicians of the clock tower would certainly not allow Chaldea to continue to exist. Moreover, there was no direct evidence to prove that Chaldea saved the world. What about Chaldea's data records? Video records? Sorry, it could also be achieved by using magic. There were also many magicians who believed that something did happen in this blank year, but Chaldea only survived for a year because of the magnetic field. That is, he spent this period of time awake and wanted to take credit for it. In short, Chaldea would face a lot of trouble. Although it was said that Olga Marie, Da Vinci, Roman, and others would not be difficult to solve all the problems, but it was still slightly difficult for them to solve all the problems once and for all. Olga Marie's third method was not yet understood, so she was not the third magician. Although Da Vinci was omnipotent, she was, after all, a weapon recognized by the clock tower. After Roman became Roman and asked Wuming to spare Gydia's life, he resumed his identity as Roman. With his temperament, it was impossible for him to let King Solomon appear again. Roman was just a Roman, the highest person in charge of Chaldea's medical department. These three, whether taken out individually or together, were not enough. At least, most of the magicians in the clock tower would not buy it. Therefore, they needed Wuming's help. Wuming went directly to the clock tower. In a room that Wuming often visited in the clock tower, Wuming found that person. Second enchanter, Gemstone Ankashia Zelrich Subian Ogu. Wuming easily met Zelik. Wuming even suspected that this guy had already guessed that Wuming would go to him for help. That's right, Wuming looked for Zelik to let Zelik help Chaldea deal with the aftermath. As the second magician, there would always be people who would give him face. Even if they did not give him face, Zelik also had a lot of connections. It would be quite easy for him to help deal with the aftermath. And Wuming also asked Zelik for a list of magicians and magician families who would definitely make a move against Chaldea. That night, he turned into something terrifying and visited these magicians. He bluntly told them that if they still wanted to reach out to Chaldea, the next time they would be annihilated. Finally, Wuming also tampered with the magic seals that had been passed down in their families in front of these magicians. This was a naked conspiracy. Those magicians who could not resist Wuming at all could only choose to compromise in fear. Now, Chaldea had a very long buffer. As long as Olga Marie mastered the third magician at that time, coupled with Olga Marie's status as one of the 12 monarchs, she would definitely have the right to speak no less than Zelik. The third magician was one of the 5 remaining magicians in the world. The other magician also had the help of a powerful magician who could travel through time and summon servants. There was also a powerful existence who could tamper with the magic seals of the Clock Tower magician family. With these, there was no doubt that Chaldea would not be in any danger. Speaking of danger, Wu Ming thought of another thing. Kalis, I remember that there was an alien existence outside Chaldea, right? Chapter 1054. Wu Ming turned to look at Kalis. Master, don't worry, Enkidu is basically done, he's taking care of the aftermath. When Wu Ming put Chaldea back in place, he accidentally discovered an existence that could be called an alien. This existence was paying attention to Chaldea, who had returned to the Type Moon world. Ignoring whether or not the other party had bad intentions, they definitely didn't have any good intentions for sneaking around. Wu Ming even suspected that Gidia took Chaldea out of the Type Moon world to protect Chaldea. In short, Enkidu, who didn't think he was of much help, volunteered to take care of this matter. After figuring out the other party's identity, it was easy to let them go if they were harmless. As the Heaven Lock, Enkidu was the most powerful weapon in human history. Adding on the fact that Enkidu had been by Wu Ming's side for so long, he had absorbed a lot of origin power, which made Enkidu extraordinary. Wu Ming even personally injected new origin power into Enkidu just in case. It could be said that Enkidu could go to the Type Moon world and call himself a god, because no one was a match for the current Enkidu. Any attack that Enkidu casually released now could be considered an attack against Su Zheng. As for the alien that Wu Ming sensed, Enkidu wouldn't be afraid of it at all. That was indeed the case. Kalis had already said that Enkidu had already taken care of those matters and was taking care of the aftermath. Since that was the case, Chaldea had nothing to worry about. However, speaking of worry, Wu Ming felt that the one he should be worried about was Kalis. Wu Ming secretly glanced at Kalis, who was floating beside him. The current Kalis was no longer wearing a dragon horn headdress, but she was still not human. The current Kalis was somewhat similar to rubies and sapphires, but the rubies and sapphires were pentagrams and hexagons with wings and bows in the middle. On the other hand, Alice was a transparent hollow sphere with sharp dragon wings. In the center of the sphere, there were 3 metal rings that rotated irregularly. In the center of the 3 rings, there was a little light, like a star. It had to be said that the current Kalis was very similar to Ruby and Sapphire. However, they were sisters, so it was normal for them to be similar. After all, Kalis' full name was Kalis Belit, or Lapis Lazuli. Like Ruby and Sapphire Saphia, Kalis was just Wu Ming's abbreviation for her. As for whether or not Kalis could become a wand like the Ruby and Sapphire, this question was temporarily ignored. By the way, Kalis, I've always had a question. Looking at the current appearance of Kalis, Wu Ming finally asked the question that had been in his heart. Now that I clearly have a way to turn you into a human, why don't you agree and instead choose this appearance? Wu Ming revealed a helpless expression, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Compared to the appearance of a human, I still prefer the style of my sister's phone. Kelly replied in a serious tone. However, Wu Ming revealed an expression of, I knew you would say that. It must be Ruby who bewitched you. Wu Ming responded to Kalis with a gaze that saw through everything. And Kalis fell into a rare silence. It seems that I guessed right. Wu Ming sighed. It couldn't be helped. Who told Wu Ming to pick up Meiyu in the past 2 days? More than once he saw Ruby give up on accompanying Ilya and secretly follow him instead. Wu Ming glanced at Kalis again. He had no intention of blaming her. I actually wanted you to experience the life of a human, but since you like this appearance, we'll leave it at that for now. After all, when Kalis thought things through one day, Wu Ming could use the power of the Great Origin to turn Kalis into a human at any time. Let's go. The arrangements here have been completed. After some time, come back and check on it, we can proceed with the next step of the plan. Wu Ming patted Kalis, who seemed to be thinking about something. Yes, master. Wu Ming opened a golden teleportation door and directly went in. Meanwhile, Collis was still absent-minded. She was thinking about what Ruby had said about bewitching her. Magical girl, huh? Collis thought as she floated and also entered the teleportation door. In Ilya's world, Shuoyu residence. A golden ripple appeared, and Wu Ming emerged from it. After Wu Ming came out of the teleportation door, the first thing he did was to look at the clock on the table. At this time, Mayu should be done with school soon. Master, I'll go and prepare to welcome Lady May. After flying out of the golden ripple, Collis directly flew toward the door, out of the door, and out of the door. At the door, there was a surge of magic, and a rather expensive red convertible car appeared there. This was a transformation of Collis. She had the ability to mimic. As for the size of the object she mimicked, she could do so with magic. Wu Ming, who was standing in front of the window and watching this scene, did not know what to say. Ever since Collis transformed into a ruby or sapphire, Collis had become even stranger. If it was in the past, Collis would definitely not have transformed into a car for Wu Ming to pick up Mayu. However, now, Collis would transform into a different car almost every time Wu Ming went to pick up Mayu. Classic, expensive, ordinary. There were all kinds of cars. This even caused Mayu's friends in school to be amazed. It could only be said that Collis was now supporting Wu Ming and paying more attention to daily life. She was no longer focused on combat. Forget it. I can only blame myself. Wu Ming sighed. Collis' change might have been caused by Wu Ming's words back then. Wu Ming's original intention was to let Collis live alone. Collis probably thought that Wu Ming no longer needed Collis. Although that was indeed the case, after all, the secret of the black soil and the root of everything was completely understood when Wu Ming returned to the root of everything after resolving the matter with Chaldea. Wu Ming had also entered the stage of adulthood. After Wu Ming returned to the root of everything became a little enthusiastic, as though it was welcoming a blood-related relative. That's right, it was enthusiastic. After that, Wu Ming also received the information and secrets that he needed to know from the root of everything. There was only one root dragon. If one had to describe it, the root dragon was the materialization of the root of everything. It did not mean that the root of everything could create a new one after the root dragon died. Therefore, the root dragon that White Yiksha had seen back then was Wu Ming. As for the problem of the root dragon's reincarnation, becoming weak, the root dragon would actually fall into a deep slumber with the root of everything and would recover after a certain period of time after the root of everything's reincarnation. It would not fall into a certain world when it was extremely weak. In other words, Wu Ming's situation was just an accident. Chapter 1055. When Wu Ming was weakened from his slumber, he accidentally wandered into a certain world. As for the reason, it was naturally the origin black soil. The origin black soil was the dust of a dead world, while the origin black soil was in slumber. When the origin reincarnated, its origin power would naturally fall into slumber as well. During this period, there would definitely be worlds that were unable to save themselves and were destroyed, which was why most worlds perished. Since the origin had a lifespan, worlds naturally had a lifespan as well. The origin could reincarnate, but worlds couldn't, and worlds would eventually reach their end, which was why a small number of worlds perished. These dead worlds would then turn into dust and return to the origin. The dust produced by these worlds that had reached the end of their lifespan and died naturally wouldn't affect the origin at all, and could even replenish the origin's energy, just like how fallen leaves return to their roots. As for the destroyed worlds, they were much more troublesome. The origin was like a mother who unconditionally spoiled her child, fully accepting and taking care of the dust of these worlds. Firstly, the origin felt guilty for not being able to save its child as a mother. After the dust entered the origin, it would fuse with the origin power, and the resulting product would be the origin black soil. Secondly, the origin wanted to use the origin black soil to recreate new worlds, which could also be considered as compensation for the destroyed worlds. As for why the origin black soil was able to counter Wu Ming, it was because the origin black soil contained negative origin power, which was also why Wu-Ming was able to counter the origin black soil. The negative emotions of a dead world were left behind in the dust, which fused with the origin power and naturally became negative origin power. The reason why Wu-Ming was able to escape from the origin and wander into a certain world was also due to the increase of the origin black soil. As more and more origin black soil was absorbed, the origin couldn't contain it anymore. Worlds weren't something that could be created at will, and even the origin needed time to recreate the origin black soil into a new world. Furthermore, the worlds between worlds were so vast that there was no end to them. The number of worlds that existed between worlds was probably more than 1 trillion, and as the root of origin and the root of origins slept and reincarnated, countless worlds that were heading towards destruction would turn into dust and passively be drawn into the root of origin, fusing with the root of origin and becoming origin black mud. Whether it was a few cycles or a dozen, the black origin soil was indeed being consumed and reforged into one world after another. However, as the great origin cycles became frequent, more and more black origin soil accumulated in the great origin, eventually causing the great origin to overload itself. Wu-Ming and most of the black origin soil hence flowed out, leaving only a little bit of black origin soil in the great origin, the black origin soil that Wu-Ming had seen when he first entered the great origin. The reason for the frequent reincarnation cycles of the great origin was actually very simple. It was caused by too much dust from the death of a world. The great origin would produce root of origin power to fuse with the dust, but as the world died faster, the great origin would have to produce root of origin power faster. This would put a burden on the great origin, causing the great origin's reincarnation cycle to accelerate, causing Wu-Ming and the black origin soil to flow out. It was like a sealed water bag that was filled to the brim, and if more water was poured in, the bag would explode and all the water would flow out. This was how the black origin soil flowed between worlds, and some even accidentally entered them. It was also because of this that Wu-Ming entered a certain world and was adopted as a normal infant. Although Wu-Ming now knew everything, this was still a difficult problem that had no solution. The only solution was to start with the creatures that lived in each world. The creatures that lived in each world would develop, be it through technology or magic, but once they reached a certain level of development, these creatures would seek to reach even higher heights, which was why they had already faced the threat of destruction. In other words, they would destroy themselves as well as the world they lived in, which was the cause of the destruction of most worlds. For example, Mayo's world was destroyed because of the Ainsworth family. However, because the M-shaped moon world had evolved into a parallel world, it indirectly resolved the threat of destruction. Even if Mayo's world was destroyed, the M-shaped moon world would still be fine. But in the end, Mayo's world was still saved by Wu-Ming. Most worlds didn't evolve into parallel worlds, which meant that if the intelligent creatures that lived in those worlds caused a world crisis like the Ainsworth family did, the only outcome for that world would be destruction. However, it was extremely difficult to start from this aspect. Once an intelligent creature reached a certain level of development, it was unavoidable for them to explore even higher heights. This was a necessity for any creature that lived in this world. But the key was whether or not these intelligent creatures could adapt to the next height and control it. If they could adapt and control it well, the world would continue to operate as usual, and the intelligent creatures would continue to live. But if they couldn't adapt and control it well, the world would very likely be destroyed. So, how could one change the creatures of a world and make them give up on exploring higher heights when they weren't confident enough? Wu-Ming could only think of one way, which was to become the god of that world. However, there were so many worlds, and Wu-Ming naturally couldn't do them one by one. Wu-Ming was testing the backup machine in preparation for this plan. This was the plan that Wu-Ming and Kalis had discussed before leaving the route. However, this was still a big plan, and the route wasn't omnipotent. The details of the plan still needed Wu-Ming to prepare, and only then could they rely on the route to complete the plan. Let's go pick up Mayu first. Wu-Ming shook his head and stopped thinking about it. Wu-Ming jumped out of the window, walked to the door, opened the door and got in. Your sunglasses. Kalis spoke like an intelligent voice, and a pair of sunglasses popped out from the steering wheel. Wu Ming grabbed it and put it on his eyes. After all, it was a convertible. Wu Ming had requested that Kalis provide sunglasses when driving such a car. Then let's go. However, before the car started, the door to the front passenger seat opened, and a beautiful lady got in. It wasn't winter, but she was still wearing a white fox fur coat, and it was the kind that covered her whole body tightly. The lady flipped her pink waist-length hair and smiled at Wu Ming. Although the lady was wrapped up tightly, it was as if she wasn't wearing anything. Her charm was completely reflected on her face. "Maeve, why are you here?" Wu Ming was shocked and quickly looked around to see if there were any passers-by. That's right, it was Maeve. Chapter 1056. Why was Maeve here? Of course, it was because Wu Ming had discussed with the suppression force and asked the suppression force to bring the Maeve Wu Ming knew from the moment before her death to this era. This way, it would not destroy history, and it would allow Wu Ming to see the original her. Although it would be better to directly ask the suppression force to take over history, Wu Ming felt that it was unfair to Maeve. That history, that story, were all created by Maeve herself, and Wu Ming had no right to take it away. In short, Maeve came to the modern era, and it was the modern era of Ilya's parallel world, and settled down and survived. And Maeve's wish, in fact, as long as Wu Ming was here, Maeve had nothing to be dissatisfied with. Perhaps the only thing that Maeve was dissatisfied with was that Wu Ming could not be with her all the time. Maeve rested her body, tilted her head, leaned forward, and lay directly on Wu Ming's shoulder. The familiar body fragrance entered Wu Ming's nose. "Of course I'm here to look for my dear." As soon as Maeve spoke, the surrounding air was filled with charm. "Don't worry, I've already set up a spell to disperse idlers around. No one will come." After all, Maeve was also a druid. Maeve's charm could be called forced hypnosis for ordinary men. Even if Maeve was wrapped up so tightly, once a passerby passed by, it would be easy to attract them. Wu Ming, who had experienced such an incident once, did not want to experience it again. Wu Ming breathed a sigh of relief, then looked directly into Maeve's eyes. "Didn't I tell you to stay at home obediently? You didn't listen to me again." Although it was a reproach, it was more or less flirting. However, immediately after, Maeve showed a hint of jealousy. "You still know that we have a family, then why do you always come to look for your little sister? Could it be that you like her?" At that moment, Wu Ming directly gave Maeve a knock on the head. "Meiyu is just my little sister. As her only relative in this world, I have to take care of her, don't I?" There was nothing wrong with this. After all, Shiro in Meiyu's world was still in Meiyu's world. In Ilya's world, Meiyu indeed only had Wu Ming as a relative. Wu Ming felt a little helpless as he reached out to rub Maeve's tearful little head. "Besides, I've already explained Meiyu's situation to you. Leah and Jihan can understand, and even Master Skaha agrees with my actions. Besides, how old is Meiyu? Why are you jealous?" Artoria and Joan of Arc were also brought to the modern world by Wu Ming through the same method. After the Battle of Cameron, Artoria was brought to this world on the ship to the Land of Ideals, while Joan of Arc was brought to this world a second before she was burned to death. Whether it was Maeve, Artoria, or Joan of Arc's injuries at that time, they were all healed instantly by the power of suppression, which could be considered as doing Wu Ming a favor. After Artoria and Joan of Arc came to this era, they were very well behaved and didn't ask anything. Because of Wu Ming, Artoria wasn't so obsessed with the country. As for Joan of Arc, she was just taking advantage of the situation to save the country. The current France was no longer the France of hundreds of years ago. Without obsession, the two of them listened to Wu Ming and lived in Winterwood City peacefully. As for Ska, Wu Ming personally went to the country of shadows to invite her out and even fought her because of it. However, Ska wasn't surprised that Wu Ming could find her, nor was she surprised that Wu Ming would come to her. After all, Ska was the first person to know about Wu Ming's identity as the source of power. The fight also dispelled Skaha's thoughts of suicide. The reason why a person would seek death wasn't because she couldn't die, but because she couldn't find the meaning to continue living on this basis. That was why she sought death. Wu Ming found meaning for Skaha, so she didn't want to die anymore. When he first met Wu Ming, Ska had pinned all his hopes on him. As for the people he taught later, like Kukulin and the others, they were just for fun while Skaha was waiting for Wuming. Ska hoped that one day Wuming could kill her, so she had high hopes for Wuming. She taught Wuming everything she knew and even threw herself at him emotionally. Not only did Wuming treat Skaha as his older sister, but Skaha also treated Wuming as her younger brother. As for why they weren't mother and son, well, after all, their ages didn't match. Speaking of mother, Wuming thought of Tiamat. Tiamat also came to this era. However, because he still couldn't let go, Wuming arranged for Enkidu and Tiamat to live on the other side of Winterwood City, one city away from Artoria, Jean, and Maeve. That's right, he didn't want them to see each other. In fact, Wuming didn't want Mayu, Ilya, and Tiamat to see each other for the time being. The main reason was that Wuming wasn't used to having Tiamat as his mother. Wuming couldn't imagine what it would be like if Tiamat called him a child, in front of everyone, but it would be terrible. Wuming couldn't help but shudder, and the hand that was massaging Maeve's head became heavier. Maeve's expression became more comfortable after being massaged by Wuming, but Wuming's action made Maeve break out of her comfort. Looking at Wuming's unnatural face, Maeve was a little worried. What's wrong? Nothing? Wuming must be hiding something from Maeve. No matter how stupid Maeve was, she could see it. However, she still chose to respect this man, and she led the conversation back to the previous topic. Although we have a family, if you don't accompany me, I'll be unhappy. Artoria, Jean, and Maeve lived together in a big house in the suburbs. However, because the house was very big and there were many rooms, Maeve could only barely share a room with Artoria and Jean. It couldn't be helped. Maeve's temperament was slightly disliked by the two. On the contrary, Artoria and Jean were very happy to talk to each other, and they even called each other sisters. Although the two of them did look very similar, only their faces were similar. At least, the difference in their breasts was sometimes very big. However, Maeve had changed a lot during this period in Winterwood City. She wrapped herself up tightly when she went out, but at home, Maeve was still slutty. According to Maeve, in order to change a little in front of Wuming, and at the same time, it was also a foundation to build a good relationship with Artoria and Jean. And Artoria and Jean also saw that Maeve had indeed changed, so the relationship between the three of them had eased during this period of time. However, Wuming basically didn't see her. As Maeve said, Wuming basically lived in Mayo's house. After all, it was to take care of Maeve. It was understandable that Maeve sneaked out to Wuming. Knowing Maeve's temperament, Wuming didn't want to reason with Maeve. Anyway, he was not in the right, so he just let Maeve do whatever she wanted. It is indeed my fault. Then how do you want me to make it up to you? I will definitely do it. Wuming's hand touched Maeve's head again. Really? Maeve gently grabbed Wuming's hand and put it on her face. Her expression was quite charming. Of course it's true. Wu Ming replied righteously. Then I want to do it 10 times tonight. Maeve's expression became more and more charming. Wu Ming even felt a little bit. Turning his head, Wu Ming's cheeks were a little bit red. Are you serious? The number of times the two talked about was naturally the number of times they should do it at night. On the night Maeve came to this era, because she experienced the intertwining of life and death, plus meeting Wu Ming, Maeve, who couldn't bear the loneliness, successfully took the first spot of Wuming. In a sense, Wuming had matured. And coincidentally, that day was also the day Wuming crossed the inexplicable threshold inside the root and became an adult root dragon. By the way, Maeve was the same as Wuming. That was also the reason why Artoria and Jean started to accept Maeve. No matter how promiscuous a woman was, if she kept her purity for the man she loved, Artoria and Jean couldn't say anything. By the way, because Maeve took the first spot of Wuming, Artoria and Jean finally decided to attack Wuming at night on the second and third night respectively. Although Wuming was a little regretful that he didn't have 3, for Wuming and Maeve, who already had sex, Maeve's request was nothing to Wuming. Okay then. Wuming agreed. After all, 10 times didn't sound like much. And Maeve also smiled. Wuming, who didn't have much experience, didn't know what 10 times was. But he would know tonight. Master, at this time, Master Mayu should be out of school. Oh no, I'm late. Forget it, Collis, I'll go first. Wait for me here. Wu Ming urged Collis anxiously and then opened the golden ripple outside the car door. You too. Be good and don't run around. After Wu Ming said that, he jumped out of the car in a panic and directly jumped into the portal. Maeve, on the other hand, rested her chin on her hands and looked at the place where Wu Ming left with a happy smile. What, as expected, my sister is the most important. Although Maeve's tone was full of blame, her happiness overflowed. And Maeve's smile was still charming, but it was also full of happiness. Chapter 1057. At the entrance of the private Suigunhara Academy's primary school. At this moment, it had been some time since school ended. Other than the primary school students who stayed behind to participate in club activities, there was almost no one at the school entrance. As for why it was because there were still a few primary school students pacing back and forth at the entrance of the primary school. Me-chan, is your brother not here yet? Gue Mimi, who had a gentle personality, looked around cautiously as if she was looking for someone. Beside Gue Mimi, Miu carried her little backpack obediently and waited as if she wasn't in a hurry at all. She was quite calm. That's fine. Actually, you don't have to wait with me. Although Meiyu's tone was still cold, compared to how Meiyu treated Gue Mimi and the others in the beginning, it was a huge improvement. What are you saying? How can we leave you here alone to wait? Yugenza Ryuko beside Gue Mimi shouted as if he was willing to die for Meiyu. All right, I know that Ryuko cares about Mei-chan. Stop shouting. Ryuko is very conspicuous like this. Who knows when he will be targeted by human traffickers and be kidnapped? Moriyama Nanakuru beside Yugenza Ryuko narrowed her eyes and smiled as she spoke to Yugenza Ryuko. Human traffickers. I'm not afraid. Although that was what he said, Ryuko's legs were already trembling. Standing beside Ilya, Kurihara Tarika, who was silently complaining in her heart, sighed helplessly. By the way, with Meiyu and Ilya's relationship, can't you let Meiyu stay at Ilya's place for a while? Kurihara Tarika suggested. This. Ilya, who was beside Meiyu, didn't know what to do. After all, she couldn't say that she actually wanted to be picked up by Wu Ming like Meiyu. Brother Wu Ming said that he would come back to pick me up every day. I believe in Brother Wu Ming. Meiyu's words helped Ilya out of her predicament. But, if Meiyu-chan's brother is really delayed by something, will Meiyu-chan really have to wait here forever? Gue Mimi was right. Waiting like this was not a solution. Why don't we go to the arcade and play for a while? Play my ass. Kurihara Hwa clenched her fist and pretended to hit Yugenza Ryuko. Yugenza Ryuko quickly hid behind Gue Mimi. Gue Mimi was at a loss, while Moriyama Nanao Tortoise was watching with a smile. This was the daily life of the four little ones, and Ilya did not find it strange. However, Ilya turned to look at Meiyu, who was silently waiting for her. Did Big Brother really run into some trouble today? Could it be Ruby's doing? Ilya recalled that Ruby seemed to be following Wu Ming and couldn't help but worry. I'll have to ask Ruby later. Ilya thought so. Just as the four little ones were fooling around and Ilya's thoughts were flying, Meiyu saw something and her eyes lit up. Then she moved. Meiyu. Ilya was the first to notice Meiyu's movement, and then the four little ones also noticed it. Looking in the direction Meiyu ran, Wu Ming saw the person who moved Meiyu. It's Big Brother. It's Meiyu's brother? That's right. It was Wu Ming who lost track of time while chatting with my Fu. Wu Ming hugged Meiyu, who threw herself into his arms. Sorry, Meiyu, I was delayed by something. Although Wu Ming's words were somewhat insincere, Meiyu didn't care. As long as Wu Ming could come, she was already very happy. It's okay, Brother Wu Ming. Then, Meiyu left Wu Ming's arms and stood beside Wu Ming. Big Brother, did anything happen? Ilya also walked over and asked cautiously. Ilya always felt that Ruby would do something. Even if she didn't do it now, she would do it in the future. Ilya expressed that she didn't believe in Ruby's character. It's okay, I just met an acquaintance and chatted for a while. Wu Ming shook his head, indicating that it was okay. Meiyu, Ilya, And the others didn't know about my Fu and the others, so Wu-ming could only explain it this way. Ah. So Mio's brother made us wait with Meiyu for so long because he likes the new and hates the old. Yugenza, who was the most lively, jumped out first. Don't be like this, Ryuko, it's very rude. Gue Mimi pulled Yugenza's sleeve, looking a little embarrassed. Ryuko has indeed said too much. Kurihara Takika pushed her glasses, then looked at Moriyama Nanao. Moriyama Nanao, who understood, continued to smile with squinted eyes. But Mei-chan's brother did forget about Meiyu because he was chatting with others, so we waited with Meiyu for a long time. Wu Ming smiled helplessly as he watched the four little ones singing one another's tune. In that case, I'll compensate you. Immediately, the four children's eyes lit up. Children were naturally interested in compensation, rewards, and other things. Only Ilya waved her hand awkwardly. Big brother, actually, there's no need. Ugh. Ilya, who was speaking halfway, was glared at by Kurihara Takika and Moriyama Nanao, and immediately shut her mouth in fear. Meiyo's brother is so rich, why don't he treat us to an arcade? As expected of Yugenza Ryuko's choice, she couldn't forget about the arcade. Meiyo's brother has been picking up Meiyu in a different luxury car every day. Kurihara Takika saw it clearly. Wu-ming, who had returned from a business trip abroad, Meiyu told the four children, drove different cars to pick up Meiyu. Kurihara Takika, who was considered mature among the four children, couldn't recognize all of them, but she could tell that they weren't ordinary cars. The four children and Ilya also took a few rides, and Kurihara Takika could feel that these cars were very luxurious. However, it was very likely that Wu-ming rented them. After all, who would buy so many cars for no reason? In other words, Mei-chan's brother is treating us to an amusement park, so what? Moriyama Nanao successfully cooperated with Kurihara Takika. As a qualified elementary school student, the two of them wanted to see how Wu-ming would respond. Would he force himself to treat them to an amusement park, or would he find an excuse to avoid it? This was a big test for Meiyu-chan. Amusement park? Gue Mimi was shocked. This isn't good. Gue Mimi, who didn't have the same thoughts as Kurihara Takika and Moriyama Nanao, was worried that this request was too rude. Yes, actually we just need to go to an arcade. Yugenza Ryuko, who wasn't as smart as Gue Mimi, was also worried. They were just classmates with Meiyu, and they weren't related. How could they ask her brother to take them to an amusement park after accompanying Meiyu for a while? Ilya-chan, say something. Gue Mimi looked at Ilya for help. Ilya, who knew Wu-ming's background, didn't know what to say. Wu-ming definitely didn't lack money. Although she also wanted to go to the amusement park, he was Meiyo's brother, not her brother. Then let's go. Meiyu made the final decision. Meiyo's words stunned the four little ones. Since Meiyu has said so, then today, I will take you to the amusement park to play. I hope it's not too late. After all, this is related to how long you can play in the amusement park. Wu-ming also made up his mind. Moreover, Wu-ming's expression didn't have the slightest hint of pain or anything to hide. It was as if he was deciding on something as normal as eating and drinking. Hey. The four little ones were stunned. Gue Mimi and Yugenza Ryuko didn't expect Meiyo's brother to actually agree to such a rude request. What surprised Kurihara Tarika and Moriyama Nanakuru was that Wu-ming didn't have any problems agreeing to it. Could it be that Meiyo's brother was actually really rich? Pa! Wu-ming snapped his fingers, and two luxury cars instantly appeared at the intersection. With a turn, they arrived in front of everyone. This scene caused a commotion in the surroundings. After all, this was the entrance of an elementary school, and next to it was the entrance of a middle school. Moreover, the location of the private Suihara Academy wasn't remote, and there were many passers-by. In the next second, two drivers wearing black suits and sunglasses got down from the car. They looked like bodyguards. They elegantly and luxuriously opened the doors of the luxury cars. They bowed and extended their hands, inviting everyone to get in. The four little ones were stunned. Even Ilya, who had never seen such a scene before, was stunned on the spot. Let's go, everyone. Wu Ming elegantly bowed to the four little ones, dragging them back to reality from their stupor. Oh! However, the exclamations of the elementary school students instantly resounded throughout the entire private Suehara Academy. Chapter 1058. After the four little ones spoke to their families on the phone, they got into the car behind. As for Ilya, Wu Ming personally called Scylla. Then, she got into the car in front with Meiyu and Wu Ming and went to the amusement park. Because they had indeed wasted a lot of time, and the elementary school students still had to go to school tomorrow, they did not play at the amusement park for long. Near the end of the night, Wu Ming got a limousine out of nowhere and drove it back to the four little ones and Ilya, who still wanted to have more fun. When they finally sent Ilya home, Scylla chatted with Wu Ming for a while. Scylla even wanted to ask Wu Ming to stay for dinner, but in the end, she was rejected by Wu Ming. After bidding farewell to the reluctant Ilya, Wu Ming drove the ordinary car that had become normal at some point and drove back to the Shuyue residence with Meiyu. The two cars and the bodyguard-like driver from before were all caused by Wu Ming using the rights he had obtained during his time in Winterwood City. Wu Ming had a lot of rights in Winterwood City in Meiyu's world, but in Winterwood City in Ilya's world, Wu Ming still had rights. However, these rights had just been obtained not long ago. He got Kalas to transfer the dead and black accounts of all the banks in the world to his account through the internet. Through spending money, he set up a company, recruited employees, and provided technology. It was all done by Kalas. After that, he went to visit the underworld leaders of Winterwood City. If he could use magic to hypnotize them, he would directly use magic to hypnotize them. Under special circumstances, he would directly place restrictions on those who could not be hypnotized. Wu Ming did not want these underworld leaders to secretly find people to deal with Wu Ming in the future. Although he was not afraid, it was indeed troublesome and would affect his mood, so Wu Ming wanted to end it once and for all. After that, Wu Ming also suggested to invest heavily in them. The effect of the stick and the carrot was basically very effective. Although these underworld leaders were unwilling, they would not go against money. After all, they also lived in this legal society. As long as they had enough money, they would be happy to let Wu Ming be the boss, and a boss who basically delegated power. Not to mention, Wu Ming's strength was also a big thigh for them, so why not do it? On the surface, Wu Ming was the boss of a big company, but in private, he had become the real ruler of Winterwood City. Although he basically did not care about Winterwood City's affairs, luxury cars, bodyguards, and drivers were basically a piece of cake. Before Wu Ming came to pick up Meiyu, he used the portal to see if Meiyu was still waiting at the entrance of the elementary school. When he saw the four elementary school students accompanying Meiyu and waiting with Meiyu, Wu Ming came up with the idea of inviting this group of elementary school students to play at the amusement park as a way of thanking them for accompanying Meiyu. Therefore, all of this was planned by Wu Ming long ago. The two cars were also ordered by Wu Ming in advance. As for the car that sent the elementary school students home, it was transformed by Kalas. After sending off the four little ones, in order to not be so eye-catching and exaggerated, Kalas became ordinary again on the road. Anyway, Ilya and Meiyu knew about Kalas' existence, so there was no need to hide it from them. Meiyu, are you happy today? Wu Ming chatted with Meiyu, who was sitting in the front passenger seat. Yes, I'm very happy. Meiyu had a heartfelt smile on her face. Ever since Wu Ming solved the problem of the black mud, he had been accompanying Meiyu during this period of time. He personally sent her to and from school, and the meals she ate were also personally prepared by Wu Ming. At night, if she was not being coaxed to sleep by Wu Ming, she would fall asleep with him. It was not the first time he brought Meiyu to various places to play. There were even times when Meiyu and Wu Ming went out alone without Ilya's knowledge. In short, she felt that she was about to be spoiled by Wu Ming. However, Meiyu felt that she was quite happy. Glancing at Meiyu's smiling face, Wu Ming tried to speak. Meiyu, if someone else wants to participate in our lives, what would you think? Wu Ming's words were rather vague, and she did not know what he was referring to. However, as a perfect Superman comparable to a PhD student, Meiyu seemed to have realized something, and the smile on her face gradually disappeared. Wu Ming, who saw this scene, realized that something was wrong. He immediately changed his tone and changed the topic. After all, we have always been two people. The Shuoyu mansion is so big, it's not bad to raise some animals, right? Fortunately, the topic just now was very vague, and Meiyu did not immediately see anything. Otherwise, it would be hard to say. Animals? Meiyu could not help but be stunned. That's right. After all, I can't always be with you. Raising some animals in our house can also help you relieve your boredom. Although the problem of the black mud was solved, it did not mean that Wu Ming was free. Wu Ming's time with Meiyu was actually compensation for leaving Meiyu. Wu Ming still had a lot of things to deal with. It was also time for Nizalik to go back and deal with the situation of the big tomb. Although Wu Ming could move the big tomb now, it would not be easy for all the members of the big tomb to live honestly in Winterwood City. Wu Ming could not force the members of the big tomb, whose justice points were at least -500, to do good deeds. The only one with high justice points was the old butler, Seabass. Therefore, he had to arrange a place for them to live. There was also Irbiruai. How did she know Wu Ming's name? Even if she had seen the previous Wu Ming, he was not known by this name before. In fact, he did not even have a name before, only the name of the Dragon of Origin, which was both a race and a personal name. Wu Ming had to figure out what was going on. There was also the nameless spellbook that the dragon gave to Wu Ming. Wu Ming had to figure out the relationship between the dragon and himself. He also had to take care of the community in the box court world. After all, Wu Ming was also a member. Whether it was as a member of No Name, or for the sake of Black Rabbit, Ren, Letitia, and the others, Wu Ming had to help the community grow. Moreover, he could not use his own power to forcibly improve the community. That would not only spoil the growth by excessive enthusiasm, but it would also be quite disrespectful to the community. Therefore, Wu Ming had to act like Sun Wukong needed to protect Tang Sanzang. This process was not easy. Moreover, Wu Ming had to deal with the conspiracy of the upper echelons of the box court. There was also Pest. Wu Ming had promised to help her, so he had to do it personally. But for better or for worse, No Name did not have to be taken over. No Name only had its meaning in the box court world. Also, Wu Ming had to return to the Godslayer world. Athena, Guinevere, and Lancelot had become the subordinate gods of Wu Ming, the last king. Wu Ming could not just ignore them. If nothing unexpected happened, he would definitely take over. After all, because of Wu Ming's identity as a Godslayer, he could not stay in the Godslayer world for too long. Wu Ming had a headache just thinking about that. How would the young female version of Guinevere in the Godslayer world meet the young female version of Guinevere in the Model Moon world? That was why Wu Ming did not choose to bring Guinevere and Artoria to the modern world, and only brought Artoria back. It was really difficult. There was also the world of the Star Cup. He had to go back and see what the god of games, Teto, had changed that world into. He was also very concerned about how Rick and Shiobi were doing. Most importantly, there was the problem of the root. A single cycle of reincarnation of the root was a very long time for long-lived species. But that did not mean that Wu Ming did not have to do anything about it. To prevent the black root soil from overloading the root and causing it to leak again, Wu Ming had to solve this problem no matter what. And the only solution now was to let Wu Ming, the god, exist in the many worlds, and let Wu Ming, the god, restrict them. And Wu Ming had been preparing all along. Chapter 1059. Putting that aside for now, Wu Ming needed to pay attention to Meiyu. Although Wu Ming changed the topic, this wasn't something that Wu Ming thought of casually. He also had the same thought. However, Meiyu's answer was out of Wu Ming's expectations. Brother Wu Ming, I'm actually not lonely. Angelica has been accompanying me while you weren't around. Wu Ming was taken aback. His foot that was stepping on the accelerator paused, but he immediately recovered. That's right. There's still Angelica. As Angelica was defeated by Wu Ming and picked up, she stayed in the Shuiyue residence. Julian also agreed to it. Wu Ming even made Angelica a maid. During the time that Wu Ming was away, Meiyu was taken care of by Angelica. Although Angelica was ice cold, it had to be said that once Angelica carried out orders, she was perfect. As a maid, Angelica would clean the Shuoyue residence 3 times a day and tidy it up neatly. At night, she would also read extracurricular books for Meiyu. During the day, she would prepare 3 meals and bento. Although they weren't top-notch, the taste was still rather delicious. Every time, Elia and the others would exchange meals with Meiyu so that they could have a taste of Meiyu's delicious bento. In addition to Wuming's performance today, perhaps the 4 primary school students had already treated Meiyu as a rich missy with a maid, a big family, and a huge business. In short, Angelica could be considered to be responsible for this family. Meiyu's impression of this former enemy had changed a lot. As for the reason why Wuming forgot about Angelica, it was because ever since Wuming returned, Angelica basically didn't have a sense of presence. Meiyu's 3 meals and bento were personally prepared by Wuming. When Meiyu slept, Wuming would either accompany her to sleep or read her stories. During the day, Wuming would bring Meiyu out to play when he was free. As for the cleanliness of the Shuoyue residence, in fact, the Shuoyue residence always had an automatic cleaning magic in operation. After all, this was Wuming's magic workshop and there was no need for someone to clean it 3 times a day. As for Angelica, because she had nothing to do, she basically sat in her room and stared blankly. She would also wait for Wuming and Meiyu to finish their meals before cooking. When Meiyu was at home, she would accompany Meiyu. When Meiyu wasn't at home, Wuming would go out. Gradually, Wuming and Angelica met less and less. Until now, Wuming had really forgotten about her. If it wasn't for Meiyu's reminder, Wuming didn't know how long it would take for him to realize this problem. Alright, now there was another problem of dealing with Angelica. Although Angelica has always been cold, I'm not lonely, so I don't need any small animals. Then Meiyu's tone changed. Or are you saying that Brother Wuming, you're going to leave me again? Definitely not. Wuming refuted without thinking. This time, it really wasn't. The matter of the root black soil had been dealt with. Wuming didn't have anything particularly important to do. Even if he had to deal with the people and things that Wuming encountered in other worlds, he wouldn't be as anxious as dealing with Gidia. Moreover, Wuming could change the flow of time in this world through the root black soil. He could completely deal with everything in other worlds, but only a few seconds had passed in this world. However, Wuming didn't need to do that. After all, he just said that he wasn't in a hurry to deal with things in other worlds, so he could take it slowly. As long as it's not, Meiyu mumbled softly. Wuming stopped the car and rubbed Meiyu's little head. Don't worry, Big Brother will accompany you. I won't leave you again. I believe in Brother Wuming. The 2 siblings chatted in the car for a while before getting out. Wuming stopped not to rub Meiyu's head, but because they had arrived at the entrance of the Shuoyu residence. After getting out of the car, Kalis transformed back into a ball with wings and followed behind Wuming. Master, young lady, you're back. A cold voice came from the door. Angelica? Why are you out? Wuming ignored the way Angelica addressed him and Meiyu. Angelica would usually be in a daze in her room at this time. After all, it wasn't time to clean up, and there was still some time before cooking. Today is the fixed day to purchase ingredients. Angelica was like a qualified maid as she answered Wuming respectfully. Brother Wuming, our family's ingredients and daily necessities are all purchased by Angelica at a fixed time. Today is indeed the day. While Meiyu and Wuming were chatting, Angelica had already walked past them and arrived at the roadside. At this time, a few refrigerated cars arrived at the entrance of the Shuoyu residence. As usual, put down the goods and you can leave. I've already transferred the money to your account. Angelica was as dignified as a boss. Her last sentence was obviously directed at the driver who got off the first car, who was obviously not the driver. The drivers who got out of the cars, including the driver from the first car, all bowed to Angelica. Thank you, big sister. It wasn't the first time they quickly unloaded the goods. After that, the drivers got into the car and left without stopping. What's going on? Wuming looked at Meiyu in confusion. I gave the money that Brother Wuming you left at the Shuoyu residence to Angelica. Angelica used her brain to earn more money, and she even built a good relationship with the sellers. According to Mayu, Angelica had built a good relationship with the sellers in terms of food, clothing, and daily necessities. Every time she needed something, the sellers would deliver it to her door, and Angelica would even give them a tip. Therefore, Angelica was a customer that couldn't be offended. Wu Ming, who knew this, couldn't help but twitch the corner of his mouth. Wu Ming had a feeling that Angelica didn't just build a good relationship with the sellers with money, she might have even beaten them up. One must know that the company represented by the logo on the refrigerated car that delivered the goods just now, although it was an ordinary company in Winterwood City, it wasn't ordinary at all. The boss of the company had some magic background, and Wu Ming's magic hint was resisted by him. However, it seemed like he used some kind of tool, but it still showed that he wasn't an ordinary person. Although he was still forcibly restrained in the end. The driver who got out of the first car was actually the boss of the company. Wu Ming felt that the guy would definitely make a move on a fat sheep like Angelica. Only after being beaten up and understanding the difference between the two would they say something like, "Big sister." However, this had nothing to do with him. If Angelica was willing, then she could be the big sister. Anyway, the man wasn't a good person, so it didn't matter if she stood on top of him. Wu Ming's mouth twitched when he saw Angelica directly use displacement magic to transfer the ingredients away. These goods were all packed in boxes, but there was a lot of them. If it wasn't for the Shuoyu residence's geographical location near the edge of the city, this would definitely cause a commotion. Angelica and Mayu were the same kind of people in some ways. They were people who didn't care about common sense or didn't know much about it. "Angelica, come find me later. I have something to talk to you about." Wu Ming started to deal with Angelica's problem. Chapter 1060. Under Meiyou's curious gaze, Wu Ming and Angelica entered a certain room and came out after about half an hour. However, they weren't doing anything indescribable. Wu Ming simply wanted to have a chat with Angelica about whether she should continue staying here. Firstly, Julian had a lot of things to do back then. Angelica was staying in the Shuoyu residence, so it was easier for Julian to have one less person. Secondly, Angelica thought that she had been abandoned and was picked up by Wu Ming, who didn't kill her. Thereafter, she acknowledged Wu Ming as her master. Thirdly, even though Wu Ming didn't realize this problem due to Meiyou's excessive independence, Angelica had indeed taken on the role of Wu Ming's nanny when Meiyu wasn't around. These were the three reasons why Wu Ming wanted Angelica to stay. But now that Wu Ming was back and Julian was almost done with his preparations, Angelica could return. Wu Ming knew that Julian still had feelings for his elder sister. Wu Ming wouldn't forcefully separate the siblings. Perhaps after Angelica returned, Julian could instill feelings and memories into her, allowing the emotionless Angelica to truly revive as Julian's elder sister. Although reviving the dead was a taboo in any world and it wasn't a true revival, Wu Ming didn't mind. However, it was still up to Julian and Angelica to decide on their own. Even though Angelica lacked emotions, she wasn't a complete puppet. In the end, Angelica made a decision. "I want to go back and take a look." Wu Ming and Meiyu bid farewell to Angelica, who returned to Meiyou's world. "Meiyu, go to your homework. I'll prepare dinner for you." Meiyu nodded lightly and walked into her room. Wu Ming also walked to the kitchen and began his simple but realistic dinner life. Then, Wu Ming saw Maeve, who was wrapped in a towel, walking out of the bathroom. "Maeve." Wu Ming hurriedly lowered his voice, afraid that Meiyu would hear him. Wu Ming didn't want to see the scene of Meiyu pointing at my Fu with a face full of resentment and asking Wu Ming who this woman is. "But, my dear, you didn't let me go," Maeve smiled charmingly. Since she didn't let her go, Maeve volunteered to stay. As for why Angelica didn't stop Maeve, it was because Angelica knew about the relationship between Wu Ming and Maeve. Angelica even knew about the existence of Artoria, Joan of Arc, Ska and Tiamat. It couldn't be helped. Because of ignoring Angelica, Wu Ming basically didn't hide anything from Angelica. And because of her lack of emotions, Angelica didn't deliberately avoid Wu Ming because her thoughts were different from ordinary people. Therefore, Angelica could be said to be the person who understood Wu Ming the most right now. "My queen, please don't play with me," Wu Ming hurriedly opened the portal and signaled Maeve to leave quickly. "Give me double tonight and I'll leave," Maeve said arrogantly. "I'll promise you anything." Wu Ming pushed Maeve into the portal. Then Wu Ming let out a long sigh. It seems that the first thing that needs to be dealt with is the issue of Meiyu and Maeve meeting. After all, it's not a solution to keep hiding it. "Brother Wu Ming, did I just hear a woman's voice?" Meiyu suddenly walked out from the corner. "It's nothing. I was just talking to Kalis, who is practicing voice changing on what ingredients to use tonight." In an instant, Kalis, who was beside Wu Ming, became the scapegoat. What else could Kalis say? She could only help Wu Ming cover it up. "Just do as usual," Meiyu said softly and didn't want to disturb Wu Ming anymore and returned to her room. Wu Ming let out a sigh of relief. Fortunately, Shuo Yu's house was big enough. Otherwise, it would be really troublesome. However, what Wu Ming didn't know was what kind of disaster he was going to face tonight. It was the next morning in the timeline. In the mansion that Wu Ming bought for Artoria, Jean, and Maeve, Wu Ming walked out of Maeve's room with a pained expression and met the adult version of Artoria. Because of the restraints, Artoria has all the memories of the Middle East singularity, so sometimes Artoria can't help but transform into her adult form. That's why Wu Ming said that Artoria and Jean's breasts were sometimes different. However, Artoria's transformation from time to time brought double the joy to Wu Ming. "Are you okay?" Artoria's face was serious, but her tone was full of concern. "Okay." However, Wu Ming's slightly pale face betrayed Wu Ming. "You can't spoil Maeve all the time." Artoria began to educate Wu Ming. Although Artoria and Jean also had sex with Wu Ming, they were not the kind of people who would get addicted to it. They would only do it with Wu Ming when they were deeply in love, but they were usually like an old married couple. However, Maeve was different. Maeve was born with a perfect body like that of a goddess. It could be said that she was born with the ability to seduce men. And Maeve also acted according to the desire brought by this ability. Otherwise, Maeve's amorous behavior wouldn't be recorded in the historical stories. In addition, the Maeve that Wu Ming knew had always been pure. After having sex with Wu Ming, it was as if the desire that had been suppressed for a lifetime had been released. That was why she kept pestering Wu Ming. This time, it was quite impressive. Artoria didn't think that doing such things was evil, but there were limits. Just like last night, Maeve's screams were so loud that she and Jean couldn't sleep well. Fortunately, when they were brought to Wu Ming's side by the restraining force, their bodies were still at the level of heroic spirits. Otherwise, the dark circles under their eyes would be hanging on their faces. "I know. I'll be careful in the future." It was impossible for Wu Ming not to be careful. If they did it every day, even Wu Ming wouldn't be able to take it. It was just like when the dust of a dead world entered the root. If the root's power couldn't supply it, the root would be burdened and forced to supply it. Over time, problems would arise. Knowing this, Wu Ming wouldn't let Maeve do as she pleased anymore. However, indulging like this from time to time was indeed very satisfying. "Isn't Jean with you?" Wu Ming asked Artoria about Jean. "She went to buy some supplements for you," Artoria replied calmly. Although Wu Ming didn't need them, as expected, compared to Artoria and Maeve, Jean was more suitable to be a wife. After all, she was a village girl. "By the way, when do you plan to bring Guinevere over?" Artoria's question surprised Wu Ming. Then, Wu Ming coughed and straightened his face. "I still have to send Meiyu to school. Let's call it a day. I don't need any supplements." After that, Wu Ming ran away as if he was escaping. Artoria shook her head helplessly. She knew that Wu Ming was hiding something, but more than that, it was because Wu Ming found it hard to accept Artoria and Guinevere's identities. After all, the three of them were a twisted love triangle. Although it was pretentious, Artoria believed that Wu Ming would arrange everything in the end. Now, he just needed some time. Chapter 1061. Arya was right. Wu Ming really needed time right now. When he thought about how many things he had to deal with, Wu Ming would rather fight another 300 rounds with Gidia. But that was all talk. He couldn't run away from what he had to face. After sending Meiyu to school, Wuming and Kalis arrived at the root of everything. The golden portal closed, and Wuming and Kalis, who had just exited the portal, were now standing on the platform of the root of everything. The original portal was purplish-black, but it was still too dark, so Wuming modified it in the root of everything. Not only did it change the color, but its ability was also greatly enhanced. Otherwise, Wuming wouldn't have been able to use the portal to directly travel from Meiyu's world to the root of everything. At the center of the platform where Kalis and Wuming stood, Wuming's backup machine had already disappeared. Without a doubt, the backup machine had gone to save the world. Wuming waved his hand, and several high-tech screens appeared in front of Wuming and Kalis. This was the result of Wuming using the authority of the root of everything. Wuming could directly see the scenes of other worlds, be it the past or the present. What was displayed on the screens was the live broadcast and recording of the backup machine saving the world. On the screens, various worlds were on the verge of destruction. In the next second, a giant white dragon descended from the sky, instantly found the source of the destruction, and stopped it. The survivors of those worlds were all deeply grateful to the giant white dragon. Although there were very few of them, there were still some who held resentment and hatred towards the white dragon for saving the world. Without a doubt, those people were not the masterminds behind the destruction of the world, but they probably had something to do with it. After that, the white dragon automatically retrieved information about that world, understood the cause, and used the root of everything to destroy those who were truly responsible for the destruction of the world and refused to change their ways. Even if they had abilities like substitutes or resurrections, they were useless in front of the root of everything. Wuming's backup machine tirelessly went to each world that was about to be destroyed one after another to save them. Looks like the backup machine can also take on my mission. However, there were worlds that had been saved, and there were also worlds that had not been saved. Wuming waved his hand again, and the screens in front of him changed instantly. The next thing that appeared on the screen was no longer a white dragon. Not only that, but the worlds on the screen were also on the verge of collapsing. A few seconds later, they completely shattered. Be it people or objects, they were all annihilated. As for the world itself, it would turn into an invisible speck of dust that wandered between worlds, eventually being sucked into the origin and becoming a speck of origin black soil. That's not a good idea. Wuming frowned. It was clear that while the origin dragon could quickly save worlds, there were many worlds that could not wait for that world to arrive. After all, there was no telling how many times the origin had reincarnated, how big the world was, or how many worlds there were. Coupled with the fact that the world was being destroyed faster and faster, Wuming's backup machine alone would not be able to save them in time. In order for Wuming's plan to become God, to proceed, he had to ensure that the world would not be destroyed again. Otherwise, they would be like a pool of water that was being filled with water at the same time. Wuming raised his hand and began to connect with the origin. An invisible thread connected to Wuming's body. Wuming wanted to temporarily stop the origin's abilities to create worlds, recycle dust, and produce origin power. Wuming wanted the origin to control the time of all worlds. Controlling a few dozen, or even a few hundred worlds could be done easily by borrowing the origin's power. However, if he wanted to control the time of all worlds that were about to be destroyed, the origin would need to stop everything else and fully focus on this aspect. By temporarily stopping or slowing down the flow of time of the worlds that were about to be destroyed, there would be enough time to save those worlds. However, there was no telling when Wuming's backup machine alone would be able to save all the worlds that were about to be destroyed. As for having Wuming save all the worlds that were about to be destroyed while their time was being controlled, that was even more impossible. After all, Wuming still had to accompany Meiyu, and there were a lot of things that he needed to take care of, so how could he save so many worlds that were about to be destroyed at once? And so, Wuming made a decision. I need to find someone to help. As for who to find, it was naturally the people that Wuming was familiar with in the worlds that he had experienced. However, they all had their own lives, and not many of them would be able to fully devote themselves to saving a world. And so, Wuming made another decision. He wanted to create a system. That's right, a system that gave the host a mission. He did as he said. And so, Wu Ming used the power of the prime origin to create the system. Because it was a drop in the ocean compared to the time needed to control all the worlds, creating this system did not burden the prime origin much. Similarly, it did not take much time and was quickly completed. Wu Ming held a ball of light that was emitting a faint white light in one hand with a satisfied look on his face. By the way, because it was a system, it did not have a fixed shape or size, and what Wu Ming was holding was the concept of a system. Wu Ming had set up a mission cycle in the system, which would issue missions at fixed times, and the missions were naturally to save the world. According to the difficulty and degree of destruction of each world, the missions would be categorized into different types, and those who fit the criteria would be given the corresponding missions. Because this system was connected to the prime origin, the prime origin would personally select the worlds and issue missions, so there was no need to worry about any issues. Normally, when a mission was issued, the default option would be accept the mission, but there were also options to postpone the mission or reject the mission. After all, the real reason why Wu Ming had set up this system was to allow Wu Ming's acquaintances to save the world without affecting their own lives. Completing a mission would grant a required reward, and the reward could be selected by the host. For example, a reward that would increase one's personal strength, or a reward that would strengthen one's group. And these rewards would be directly replicated by the prime origin from each world where such rewards existed, so there was no need to worry about affecting other worlds. Moreover, because it was for acquaintances, there would be no failure penalty even if the reject the mission was chosen, and the rejected mission would not be delayed but transferred to someone else. However, if the postpone the mission option was chosen, the reward would definitely be reduced. Postpone the mission meant that the host would temporarily accept the mission and not do it immediately. And if the host did not accept the mission but did not do it immediately, the reward would naturally be reduced. Of course, if there was enough time, the host could also request this system to accept more missions. In any case, this was a rather good system from all aspects. Master, do you want to give it a name? Collis suggested. A name. After thinking for a second or two, Wu Ming gave an answer. Just call it system. Chapter 1062. Collis didn't say anything about this. After all, she already knew that her master was terrible at naming things. She was just looking forward to it. Now, let the great origins send this system to a designated existence. Then, with that existence as the unit, it can be spread to the surroundings. The system was a concept. Therefore, Wu Ming would split it into several parts and send it to a certain existence in the world that Wu Ming had experienced. Then, that existence would spread it to other people designated by Wu Ming. Wu Ming lightly tossed the system in his hand, and the ball of light instantly disappeared. The system had been sent by the Great Origin to a designated person in the world designated by Wu Ming. In Meiyo's world, Artoria, Jean, and Maeve all received the system. Immediately, the three of them gathered together. My dear needs me. Of course, I'll help him. Maeve smiled sweetly. She didn't want to be treated like a vase by Wu Ming. Fortunately, Wu Ming didn't do that. He still chose to let her help. This isn't just helping Wu Ming. It's also saving other worlds. Artoria was King Arthur after all. She had a strong sense of justice. I'll help as much as I can. Although Jean didn't have much confidence, when it came to saving other worlds, she would definitely not hesitate, just like Artoria. After all, this was indeed helping Wu Ming. Although Enkidu also received the system, her main task was to look after Tiamat. As for Meiyu, Ilya, and the others, although they weren't weak, Wu Ming didn't give them the system. Elementary school students should just obediently go to school. Great Underground Tomb of Nizalik. In the office, the guardian supervisor Yair Bade sat on the high-class sofa that belonged to Wu Ming's office. He had a serious expression as he went through documents. That is, if you ignore the fact that Yair Bades but was constantly moving against the sofa. If Demugos were here, he would definitely ask Yair Bade what he was doing. Then, Yair Bade would reply with an infatuated look on his face that he was trying to taint Wu Ming's aura. Right at this moment, Yair Bade froze as if he had just received something. Knock knock. There was a knock on the door, and Demugos walked in. Seeing the stunned Yair Bade, Demugos was puzzled. Demugos walked to the desk and put down the document in his hand. What's wrong, Yair Bade? Yair Bade, who had regained his senses after hearing Demugos' words, had a serious expression on his face. Sir Wu Ming sent a message. When it came to Wu Ming, Demugos became serious. Demugos, Lord Wu Ming is going to become a god in another world. I see, so that's why Lord Wu Ming left this world. Then we will naturally get what Lord Wu Ming wants. Both Yair Bade and Demugos had a joyful expression. As expected of the Supreme Honorable, even his goal was so great. The two began to imagine. According to the Supreme Honorable's decree, we need to implant the system that Lord Wu Ming passed to me into everyone in the great underground tomb of Nizalik to help Lord Wu Ming save the worlds that are about to be destroyed. After all, if those worlds are destroyed, Lord Wu Ming's goal will not be achieved. Hearing this, Demugos pushed up his glasses. Indeed, and we can even win people's hearts through rescue. As expected of Lord Wu Ming. Neither of them cared about why other worlds were involved. After all, they had come to another world in the great underground tomb of Nizalik. There was nothing wrong with Wu Ming going to another world. Then, Yair Bade stretched out her hand, and a ball of light appeared in her hand. You can implant this system through contact. Lord Wu Ming has already put the specific method of use in the system. Arrange it as soon as possible. As she spoke, Yair Bade touched Demugos with the ball of light. In the next second, Demugos had a thought, and the same ball of light appeared in his hand. So that's how it is. As expected of Lord Wu Ming, to be able to create such a powerful tool. Then Demugos bowed slightly. Then I'll take my leave. I'll get everyone in the great underground tomb of Nizalik to implant it as soon as possible. Demugos left the room, leaving Yair Bade alone in the room with a look of excitement. Lord Wu Ming, I will definitely make you a god in another world. The same thing happened in another world. In the world of the god-slayers, Athena, Lancelot, and Guinevere, who were living on a small island in the Pacific Ocean, received the system at the same time. My lord! Lancelot, who was dressed like an older sister, looked very excited. It's Lord Villo? Guinevere, who looked like a young girl, was even more excited. Interesting. Athena, on the other hand, seemed to be very interested in this system. My lord needs us. Lancelot immediately dressed up, as if he was about to go save the world. Wait, uncle, don't be in such a hurry, Guinevere quickly said. Lancelot was confused. With just the three of us, I'm afraid we can't help much. This system has a spreading function, and there's also a list of people who can be trusted. Why don't we leave one person to spread the word? Athena instantly understood Guinevere's meaning. That's right, I think so too. This way, we can help Lord Villo more efficiently. If that's the case, let my beloved daughter stay. With my lord's deterrence, even without me, no one would dare to attack you, Lancelot suggested. That's right. Even if you become his subordinate god, you won't have much combat power. At most, you can protect yourself. If that's the case, you should stay. Then, Lancelot and Athena instantly disappeared. They accepted the system's mission and went to save the other worlds. Guinevere, who was left alone, was in a state of sorrow. Why did this happen? I wanted to see if I could see Lord Villo. In the game world, in the human kingdom of Elgia, the residence of the queen, Rick, who had installed a mechanical arm on the broken arm, hurriedly ran in from outside. Rick had matured a lot, but he was not as haggard as before. Chloe, I have news of Lord Villo. Rick's sister, Chloe, who was not dressed very elegantly, walked out in surprise. Compared to the cheerful and lively Chloe before, Chloe was now more dignified. However, Chloe did not change when it came to her brother. The god who disguised himself as a human to help you? Didn't you say he went to the other worlds? After Wu Ming left, Rick did not hide it and told his sister about Wu Ming's identity, who was the current queen of the human kingdom. After Teto became the only god, Clo, with the support of Rick and many other humans, established the human kingdom of Elgia and became the queen. Teto repaired the World Cup, so the living conditions of the humans were not bad. More and more humans from small tribes joined Elgia, and Elgia became more and more prosperous. Let's not talk so much. Take a look at this first. Rick instantly held Clo's hand. Clo was stunned as if she was electrocuted. This system is very suitable for the development of us humans. After understanding the system that had been transferred from Rick to Crony, Crony expressed her thoughts. I think so too, but I'm still considering whether to give this to other races. Although the world was at peace, the conflicts between the various races could not be resolved so easily. The races that needed to cooperate were willing to put aside their hatred, but the forest elves and goblins were still enemies, not to mention the other races. Let's do it secretly in our country first. Our only god is Teto, after all. If we spread the outer gods' things, I'm afraid the only god will be unhappy. Clo, who had been the queen for a while, immediately made a decision. Of course, the system has stated that we can spread it directly to the Jikai race. I'll leave this task to you, Rick. Remember to explain it to Zio properly. I know, I'll contact the Jikai race. Rick looked helpless. Then, Clo showed a pained expression. As the ambassador, you're the only one who has good contact with the Jikai race. However, the Jikai race did have some problems with their brains recently, so you should be careful. Although Rick had given up the throne to his sister, he had become a diplomat of the kingdom. Rick had always been working hard for the country. Moreover, Rick's mechanical arm was obtained through diplomatic contact with the Jikai race. Due to Zio, the Jikai race was gradually awakening their individual emotions, but machines were still machines, and no one could guarantee when they would have problems. The Jikai race has already unilaterally submitted to the Villo, just like the Skywing race. I believe that if it's something from the Villo, they would definitely accept it. Rick looked confident. If that's the case, let's contact the Skywing race at the same time. A child's voice rang out in the hall where only Clo and Rick were present. The only god. Teto. When did you get here? Both Clo and Rick instantly knew who the owner of the voice was. It was the god of games, Tut. As for why Rick acted like he was familiar with Teto and even dared to be so impudent, it was because Teto would come looking for Rick to play that unfinished game of chess, and the game was still ongoing. Moreover, Teto was born from Rick's thoughts, and the two of them could be considered close friends, which was why Rick was so casual. I'm a Villo after all, so I'll allow him to interfere with this world as much as possible. Just do it. If Wu Ming hadn't given the Celestial Cup to Teto, Teto wouldn't have become the only god. In a sense, Wu Ming could be considered the father of this world's only god. After Teto's voice disappeared, Clo and Rick looked at each other and nodded. They then split up and began to spread the system. Above the clouds of the kingdom of Elgia, Teto was holding a white ball of light with a smile on his face. The system only gave it to the humans. Looks like you want the Skywing and Jikai races to ally with the humans. As expected of you. In the next second, Teto, who had loaded the system, disappeared. Such a fun game, system, naturally had to be tried out by him, the only god. Chapter 1063. Let's go back, Matthew. Gadotsi looked particularly worried. It's okay, Senpai. My body was originally used for experiments. I'm already very satisfied to be able to live until now, meet Senpai, and experience so much. Before Matthew finished speaking, he fell into a coma. Matthew? Matthew! Gadotsi didn't know where she got the strength from, but she directly carried Matthew and ran back to Chaldea. The next second after Gadotsi and Matthew's figures disappeared, a golden ripple appeared, and Wu Ming walked out of the portal. Looking at the two people in the distance, Wu Ming was quite glad. He was glad that he came in person this time. Casey Perrick. Wu Ming whispered softly, and a snow-white squirrel-like animal came out of the snow. It was Fufu. In fact, during this period Fufu had been following Matthew, but Matthew couldn't find it most of the time. Just like this time, Fufu was hiding in the snow. By the way, Fufu was not as afraid of Wu Ming as before this time. Instead, it walked to Wu Ming and sat down. "You want to save Matthew, right?" Wu Ming said. Fufu didn't speak, nor did it shout. It just nodded gently. "Then do it. You've been in Chaldea for so long, it's time to repay Matthew's kindness." Fufu was quite puzzled. Could it be that Wu Ming called it out just to say this? "I originally wanted to adjust Matthew's body myself, but I accidentally found you. I don't like people who don't repay kindness, so I'm going to use your ability as a beast to adjust Matthew's body." It turned out that Fufu wanted to use the energy accumulated during the time in Chaldea. Fufu agreed. Wu Ming waved his hand and a golden teleportation gate opened up. A mass of golden essence flew out from it. The essence instantly fused into Fufu's body. In the next second, Fufu's body began to change. Fu's head, body, and limbs swelled up as if they had grown tumors. However, as if he didn't want to turn into a beast, Fufu forcibly suppressed it. The tumor-like swelling all came to Fufu's tail. In the end, Fufu's body did not change at all. Only his tail became incomparably huge, like a burning seven-colored flame, filling the sky. Fufu glanced at Wu Ming, then turned around abruptly and charged towards Chaldea. Watching Fufu enter Chaldea, Wu Ming did not move because he was waiting for someone. However, Wu Ming knew that that person would not come for a while, so he chose to walk around and enjoy the snowy scenery. Wu Ming did not give the system to anyone in Chaldea. After all, other than the heroic spirits, only Olga Marie, who was about to master the third law, was powerful. Matthew, Gadotsi, Roman, and the less than 20 Chaldea employees who survived did not have much combat power. Moreover, they did not need to become powerful, especially Gadotsi, Matthew, and Roman. They did not desire to become powerful. They were satisfied with being ordinary people. Wu Ming walked while daydreaming. About half an hour later, a man in a white coat came from Chaldea. It was Roman Ackerman. As soon as they met, Wu Ming asked about Matthew. "How is Matthew? Is his body okay now?" The reason why Roman came out late was naturally to check on Matthew's physical condition after being transformed by Fufu's power. Matthew's injuries are completely healed, and his cells are no longer dying. He can be said to be the same as a normal person, and his physical fitness is far better than that of an ordinary person. Roman's face was filled with joy from the bottom of his heart, and at the same time, he was relieved. After Roman asked Wu Ming to bypass Gideon, he gave the 10th ring of King Solomon to Wu Ming. As a price, Roman completely bid farewell to his identity as King Solomon. However, after that, Matthew's body began to deteriorate, which made Roman blame himself. If he still had the ring, he would have used all of King Solomon's power to save Matthew. After all, his identity had been exposed. The remaining less than 20 people in Chaldea knew Roman's true identity, so Roman did not need to hide it. However, Roman gave the 10th ring to Wu Ming. But now, the fourth beast who had been hiding in Chaldea had transformed Matthew's body at the cost of sacrificing his intelligence. Matthew would no longer be affected by the aftereffects of human experimentation. Moreover, they had defeated the fourth beast in disguise. This was a good thing for all mankind. "It seems that you really like being a human, Solomon," Wu Ming said, turning to look at the snow. "Just call me Roman. Indeed, I like being an ordinary person. If it weren't for the sake of humanity, I wouldn't have become a doctor and entered Chaldea." Roman and Wu Ming stood side by side, looking into the distance. "Congratulations, your wish has been completely fulfilled," Wu Ming said half-jokingly. After all, Roman had completely lost the ability of King Solomon, and he was already an ordinary person. "If it's possible, I really want to quit my job in Chaldea and be a real ordinary person. I want to enjoy my life, work my life, be happy my life, and worry my life." But he could not. Chaldea was now waiting to be done. Even if it was purely for Matthew, Roman had to stay. In order to prevent human experimentation like Matthew from appearing in Chaldea again, Roman had to stay and supervise Chaldea. I'm going to let Gydia work for me. Wuming stated his intention. Work? Roman was stunned. It has destroyed many worlds. After those worlds have been reconstructed by me, I'm going to let it protect those worlds. I see. Even Roman found it slightly difficult to accept the topic of destroying and reconstructing worlds. Also, I'm going to let Gydia inherit your power and save those worlds that are about to perish for me first. Wuming was going to let Gydia implant the system to save the world. However, the system given to Gydia was dedicated to monitoring Gydia. There would be no reward, and there would be no rejection of missions. Everything was mandatory. This was the proverb, you can avoid death, but you can't escape punishment. Although Gydia was spared, punishment was inevitable. Let it go. I believe that it will be willing to do so now. After experiencing the threat of death, Roman thought that Gydia would reflect on it. After all, it was a tactic created by Roman. Roman did not think that Gydia would be pulled down. That's it then. I'll go first. After all, Wuming still had a lot of things to do. Don't you want to see the director? Roman suddenly said. Wuming stopped, turned around, and glanced at Roman. She has Parmelia with her. I don't need to. I'll come and see her when she has fully mastered the third method. Opening the golden ripple, Wuming did not stop and walked straight in. After the portal closed, Roman raised his arm. He had a communication device like Gadatsi's on his arm. Director, he's gone. Chapter 1064. Wuming returned to the route, and Kalis was waiting for Wuming on the central platform of the route. As long as Wuming left, Kalis would replace Wuming as the temporary administrator. Master, I've confirmed all the people you've been paying special attention to. They've all been implanted with systems, so you don't have to worry about letting them meet for now. Wuming felt a bit awkward at Kalis's honest words. Wuming coughed to hide his awkwardness. Ahem, let's begin the next part of the plan. The next part of the plan was Wuming's plan to become a god. He had to restrict the highly developed worlds and control them as a god, so that they wouldn't self-destruct because they wanted to explore higher levels of development. My contract, my dependence, I am the place where the tributaries converge. Bind with me, heed my call, obey my command, appear. As Wuming chanted the words of the spirit, nothing happened. Or rather, nothing happened to the root. Meanwhile, in each of the highly developed worlds, a silhouette appeared. It was a silent silhouette. Now, Wuming's essence and abilities had transcended from before, reaching an unprecedented and indescribable height. The price was that Wuming's eyes couldn't be changed back to their original color, and could only maintain their golden color and fiery red pupils. The 12 clones had completely broken free from the shackles of the spirit, and could activate their abilities with just a thought. Chanting the spirit was just a habit of Wuming's. Not only that, but all of Wuming's abilities had been strengthened like never before. The dependence of the 12 clones could create countless clones with strength comparable to the main body. Wuming wanted to use these clones to enter the highly developed worlds selected by the root to restrict these worlds and prevent them from dying. Wuming's original plan was to wait until all the worlds that were about to be destroyed were saved before activating it. However, in the end, Wuming still chose to work on both fronts. Restricting highly developed worlds from heading towards destruction, saving worlds that were about to be destroyed from destruction, stopping all functions of the root, and focusing all efforts on controlling time in all worlds. That way, the world would no longer be destroyed, and the world dust would not enter the root and become the root's black soil. Wuming's series of actions would no longer lead to the destruction of worlds. As long as he restricted the highly developed worlds and saved the worlds that were about to be destroyed, everything would return to the right track. The Great Origin would no longer accelerate its reincarnation due to its burdens, and the world would no longer be destroyed. The death of a world would only be a natural death because it had reached its end. In short, all that was left now was only a matter of time. After some calculations, Master only needs to send Miu-sama to school for another 3 months, and everything will be realized. With Kalas's words, Wu-ming was relieved. Everything is finally settled. Wu-ming lay down on the root's platform and rested. Thinking back to the time when the old man who took him in had passed away, when he obtained his own scale and headed to a mysterious world to begin this memorable journey, Wu-ming was filled with endless emotions. Wu-ming got to know quite a few people and came into contact with quite a few things along the way. But in the end, he still managed to return home and eliminate the trouble brought by the origin, black soil, as well as alter the origin and prevent the destruction of a large number of worlds. This is much more interesting than before. Before, Wu-ming was referring to the root dragon before this reincarnation. Back then, the root dragon was like a machine that constantly carried out its mission to protect the world. Although it had visited many worlds and seen many things, it was still rather boring. After Wu-ming received these memories from the root, he immediately used some means to extract them and seal them away. The reason could be summed up in one word: boring. Moreover, Wu-ming felt that it was enough to have the memories of when he was Wu-ming. If he received those memories, Wu-ming might not be himself anymore. Or rather, it was very likely that it would revert back to being the tireless, brainless, and machine-like origin dragon that only knew how to save the world. At that thought, Wu-ming felt that it was great that he could become Wu-ming from the root dragon. At that moment, Kalas suddenly spoke, interrupting Wu-ming's thoughts. Master, according to the memo, you have yet to resolve the issue of Irbiruai, the Platinum Dragon King, and the Nameless Spellbook. At Kalas's words, Wu-ming abruptly jumped up from the platform. I would have forgotten if you didn't mention it. Wu-ming swiped his hand across the void, and a virtual screen appeared. This was the current world of the underground tomb. Irbiruai was a vampire, after all, and Wu-ming was using the root to search for the earliest timeline of Irbiruai's era. Wu-ming decided to resolve Irbiruai's issue first. So, it's 200 years ago. Wu-ming found it. Just adjust the timeline to 300 years ago. I'll go ahead and see what's going on. She had traveled through the timeline before Irbiruai was born and then hid in the dark. Wu-ming could not find the reason for his distrust. However, Wu-ming's mind suddenly lit up. He paused for a moment as if he understood something. Could it be that I actually went to that era and came into contact with that dragon while hiding in the dark? As for what Irbiruai said about Wu-ming being her benefactor, perhaps Wu-ming had gone to that world and accidentally exposed his past to Irbiruai. It seemed that he had to find another way. If that's the case, I won't go, right? I don't believe that it's because of me if I don't go. However, in the next second after Wu-ming said that, several figures somehow appeared on the platform of the root. Maeve, Tiamat, Athena, the young version of Guinevere, the young version of Guinevere, Lancelot, Pest, Letitia, and Shilby. These young girls of all shapes and sizes? At first, they did not know what to do. However, they quickly reacted. Because Wu-ming was here. However, while they reacted, Wu-ming did not. Darling. Maeve jumped into Wu-ming's arms. Child. Tiamat hugged Wu-ming from behind. Lord Villo. The young version of Guinevere and the young version of Guinevere hugged Wu-ming from both sides. Athena stood aside and watched the show. She stopped Lancelot, who wanted to help the monarch. Letitia comforted Pest, who did not get the chance. Shiobi, on the other hand, was more easily satisfied. She only needed to see Wu-ming, the person who changed her and made her develop feelings for him, and that was enough. Kalas. What's going on? Wu-ming was extremely flustered. Master, they are all existences with systems implanted in them. After they completed a mission to save the world, the reward they chose was to meet you. Therefore, the root in charge of giving out rewards directly gave them the rewards they wanted. By the way, Master, Lady Irbiruai and Lady Miyu have also come into contact with systems, for some reason. Wu-ming could not help but look at Maeve. He felt that it was Maeve's doing. Maeve, on the other hand, chuckled and admitted it. Also, your female guards in the Godslayer world have also been implanted with systems. Kalas emphasized the word female. Wu Ming looked at the young version of Guinevere. The young version of Guinevere chuckled and admitted it. The young version of Guinevere is the reward that Artoria chose. Wu Ming's eyes started to lose focus. At that moment, Enkidu broke through space and walked out. I'm sorry, Lord Wu Ming. I accidentally let Mother come into contact with systems. Now, looking at the large number of young girls surrounding Wu Ming, Enkidu could not continue. As the saying goes, raising a cow is the same as raising 2 cows. It seems that one more Tiamat would not be a problem. Kalis, let's go. With a whoosh, Wu Ming disappeared. He went to 300 years ago, the era before Ibirui was born. Wu Ming now knew why he left his mark in that world hundreds of years ago. It was because it was unavoidable. What was worth celebrating was that the world crisis had basically been resolved, and Wu Ming's ultimate goal had been achieved. However, after Wu Ming returned from that world, he had to face how he provoked these young girls. They lived in peace. This was comparable to the destruction of the world. This might be the end of one thing, the beginning of another. End. Chapter 1065. In the Hakata world, because of Wu Ming's achievement in defeating absolute evil, No Name was given the title of regional ruler by White Yaksha. Coupled with the recapture of the flag, the community was able to develop rapidly, but No Name still didn't have a name. Because it was taken away by the Demon King, if they wanted to get back the title, they had to obtain the contract to obtain the name of No Name. But this was extremely difficult. If it wasn't for someone intentionally releasing Az Dakaha, who knew when they would be able to find the flag of No Name. And there were also the members of No Name that were taken away by the Demon King. They had to all be found, which wasn't an easy task. But if it was according to 16 Knights' words, that would be, "This is interesting, isn't it?" In the No Name conference room, Rin, who had just finished analyzing the current flaws of No Name, looked at the excited 16 Knights who stood up and sighed helplessly, but didn't say anything. What's interesting about it? 16 Knights, Sen's brain is always wired differently from others. Black Rabbit couldn't help but complain. But Jiu Yuao stood on 16 Knights' side. 16 Knights is right. This is more challenging for this lady. Ruai Hiroyuki, who was holding the 3-furred cat, also nodded. Interesting. What's interesting about it? Miss Hiroyuki and Miss Hiroyuki are obviously just playing around. Black Rabbit was so angry that his ears jumped. Don't say that, Black Rabbit. 16 Knights smiled wantonly and looked at Black Rabbit. Villo, that guy defeated absolute evil in the final trial by himself. How can this uncle be left behind? We're not delicate flowers that need to hide behind him. If this kind of thing is always left to the Villo, wouldn't we lose face? Jiu Yuao added. So, we have to finish what even the Villo couldn't. Ruai Hiroyuki's eyes became determined. Letitia, who was sitting on the side, couldn't help but smile. She could see that these 3 problem children did want to be in the limelight, but more importantly, they also wanted to take on the responsibility of the community and didn't want to let Wu Ming bear everything alone. However, they were still not strong enough. After all, the reason why Wu Ming didn't seek help from No Name when Az Dakaha was released was because they were too weak. When Wu Ming had faced Az Dakaha, who had the origin black soil, he didn't even dare to say that he had a 100% chance of winning, so how could he involve others? Otherwise, Wu Ming wouldn't have used himself as bait to entangle Az Dakaha and prevent him from wreaking havoc. Otherwise, with Az Dakaha's strength at that time, the lower levels of the box court would have been wiped out, and it would be hard to say if all the members of No Name would have survived. Then you'll have to hurry up and become stronger. Letitia smiled. At this moment, a light spot appeared above the conference room table. The light spot suddenly split into several parts and merged into everyone's body at a speed that no one could react to. 16 Knights closed her eyes and sensed the information from the light that entered her body. A few seconds later, she suddenly opened her eyes. I was still left behind by that guy. However, 16 Knights wasn't dispirited because of this. Instead, her smile was exceptionally bright. However, this is also a way to become stronger. Watch me use this Villos thing to catch up to him. When the time comes, he'll cry. The thing that just entered the bodies of No Name was the system that Wuming created. And you can also become a savior. Jio Yuasuka's eyes were shining as if she was very interested in saving the world. There are also rewards that can be obtained. Hirai Hiroyuki pointed out the main point. This was also the way to become stronger that 16 Knights had mentioned. And you can also choose a group reward. That's great, young Master Ren. This way, our community can develop even faster? How did Mr. Villo create such a powerful gift? Black Rabbit's face was filled with joy. This reward is really... Now even finding the former members of the community and our No Name's previous names will be more convenient. Mr. Villo has really helped us a lot. Ren's face also showed an uncontrollable smile. As expected of my master. Letitia seemed to be used to her master being able to do surprising things. However, Letitia noticed that Pest, who didn't have much right to speak and didn't speak much, was now frozen in place as if he was possessed. What's wrong, Pest? Letitia curiously walked to Pest's side. I'm fine. Pest was shocked and immediately turned his back on Letitia. However, Pest didn't look like he was fine no matter how she looked at him. I'll go out first. Pest finished speaking and ran out without looking back. After that, Letitia found a few drops of tears on Pest's seat. Pest, who ran out, couldn't stop his tears from flowing. This was because in the system that Wuming gave her, there was a message from Wuming. I've already investigated. The sun entering the Little Ice Age caused the Black Death to break out. It was actually to suppress a human's final trial. As long as your strength is enough, I will definitely help you solve the human's final trial. This way, White Yaksha will have no reason to let the sun enter the Little Ice Age, and the history of the Black Death will also be changed. Moreover, this is the box court, so you don't have to worry about disappearing. Maybe at that time, I won't even have to do anything. You and your No Name companions can kill that human's final trial. So, whether it's summoning Wes and Latine or changing the birth of the Black Death, I want you to do it yourself. Through this gift that I'm giving you, work hard to become stronger, my little maid. Recalling these words, Pest's tears began to fall faster and faster, and so did his footsteps. Finally, after reaching his room, Pest couldn't hold it in anymore and burst into tears. Letitia, who was standing outside Pest's door with her back against the wall, smiled faintly and said the same words as before. As expected of you, my master. The X-Moon world was located inside Chaldea, which was located on an iceberg in the center of the South Pole. Because of Wuming and Zelik, Chaldea managed to survive. The dozens of masters who were kept in the freezer also woke up and were sent to the hospital for treatment. Now, everyone knew that Chaldea wasn't to be trifled with. Only a few rascals dared to target Chaldea. However, even Olga Marie's Animusphia family would be able to take care of these rascals. After Olga Marie completely learned the third spell, Chaldea might become another great influence in the magician world. It also seemed to reflect Chaldea's beautiful future. During this time, the sky in Chaldea often cleared up, but this wasn't a bad thing. Godotzi and Matthew would come out for a walk from time to time. Although it was a little cold, this peace couldn't be exchanged. Today, the two were still walking outside. By the way, Matthew, do you know that Chaldea is in the South Pole? Godotzi suddenly asked. Matthew's little head couldn't help but tilt. The South Pole? No, senior, I'm not very sure. After all, I haven't been out much. After all, Matthew was the product of Chaldea's human experiments. Naturally, he didn't know. Is that so? Godotzi probably also thought of this and felt a little lonely. Today, I learned from the doctor that Chaldea is on an iceberg in the center of the South Pole. I thought it was on the Himalayas, after all, it was the highest mountain in the world. Normal people would generally think so. Even if they didn't think so, they wouldn't have thought that Chaldea was on the snow mountain in the South Pole. I didn't think about this problem. Matthew looked up at the sky and said quietly, "Actually, I'm satisfied as long as I can see the blue sky." Looking at Matthew like this, Gadotsi felt particularly distressed. At this time, Matthew suddenly coughed. Cough, cough, Matthew. Gadotsi immediately supported Matthew, who almost fell. A trace of blood emerged from Matthew's palm that was covering his mouth. Matthew's body had reached its limit. As a test subject of the heroic spirit possession experiment, it was a miracle that Matthew could live until now, and accompanied Gadotsi through 7 singularities. Even with the existence of Galahad's spiritual base, Matthew's body was full of holes. In other words, Matthew didn't have long to live. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.